book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Stokely, A Life by Peniel E. Joseph. This is from the preface. Stokely Carmichael is a troubling icon of America's civil rights years. His Black Power call became a national Rorschach test. Whereas many blacks viewed it as righteous, many whites saw violent foreboding. Newspapers brooded over Carmichael's words, quickly forming a consensus that judged the slogan to be at best intemperate and at worst a blatant call for anti-white violence and reverse racism. In 1966, Black Power reverberated around the world, galvanizing blacks, outraging whites, and inspiring a cross-section of ethnic and racial minorities. In 1969, Carmichael left the United States for Conakry, Guinea, where he reinvented himself as a roving Pan-Africanist organizer and professional revolutionary. For the next 30 years, he remained an energetic dissident, a throwback to the heady years of the 1960s. Carmichael turned the quest for black political power into his life's work. His faith in a style of politics many considered anachronistic came out of the same tenacity and stubbornness that once made him one of the most effective and controversial activists of his generation. These same qualities, however, limited Carmichael's efforts as a Pan-Africanist political mobilizer. Before leaving America, Stokely resigned as Black Power's glamorous enfant terrible. Telegenic, brash, equal parts angry and gregarious. Whether dressed in three-piece suits, leather jackets, sharecroppers' overhauls, or African dashikis, Carmichael became to represent the era's multifaceted identity, a hipster hero whose easy grace allowed him to consort effortlessly with both the dignified and the damned. The name Stokely Carmichael first came into my consciousness when I was a young boy coming of age in New York City. As the proud son of a Haitian mother who belonged to local 1199 Hospital Workers Union, part of SEIU, I grew up hearing stories of how civil rights activists, Black Power revolutionaries, Pan-Africanist freedom fighters, and trade unionists helped to shape a new world in America and beyond. By the time I was in elementary school, I was on my first picket line, accompanying my mother in support of an 1199 strike. Both Malcolm X and Martin Luther King supported 1199 during the 1960s. Stokely Carmichael's political importance came into sharper focus when I was in junior high after the premiere of the landmark PBS documentary series Eyes on the Prize, which featured the 24-year-old Carmichael's fiery Black Power speech and rightly characterized Stokely as his generation's heir to Malcolm X. Over the course of a decade of research on Carmichael, I would come to understand him as that and much more. Carmichael's youth, casual dress, and charisma made him an easily identifiable hero, one whose quick smile and passionate speeches left an indelible impression. An adopted son of the South by way of Trinidad, the Bronx, and Harlem, Stokely adapted to while transforming whatever environment he encountered. As a native New Yorker growing up in the city's tense racial climate of the 1980s, I found Carmichael's survival instincts appealing. As a young graduate student in Philadelphia, I had the opportunity to hear him speak and briefly met him afterward. He encouraged me to stay committed to the Black freedom movement, a struggle he defined as infinite. With his flowing African robes, gray hair, and white beard, he looked like a prince. And he had changed his name. He was no longer Stokely Carmichael. As Malcolm Little had become Malcolm X and later El Hajj Malik El Shabazz, Stokely had become Kwame Ture. It was a name that paid homage to his two African heroes, men who had been the first presidents of their countries, Ghana's Kwame Nkrumah and Guinea's Sekou Touré. Kwame Ture spelled the Guinean's name not as the French did, as white Europeans did, but as Arabs and Muslims did. Sekou Touré, S-E-K-U-T-U-R-E. As a college student, Carmichael helped transform America by organizing sit-ins, demonstrations, and voter registrations during the Civil Rights Movement's heroic years, a period that roughly encompasses the decade between the 1954 Brown v. Board Supreme Court decision, desegregation decision, and the 1965 Voting Rights Act, and has become enshrined in public memory through national holidays, films, commemorations, and monuments. Carmichael's deep sense of justice contributed to his evolution into Kwame Ture, the Pan-Africanist revolutionary and anti-capitalist organizer who moved to West Africa and remained tenacious in the face of searing political setbacks. Carmichael ultimately judged America incapable of creating the free and just world he had struggled for as a young man. But despite living in Africa for the final 30 years of his life, Carmichael's legendary stature as a black power activist lingered, even if many ignored his lasting contributions to civil rights struggles that included a bruising quest for the vote in the Deep South. Although today largely forgotten, Stokely Carmichael remains one of the protean figures of the 20th century, a revolutionary who passionately believed in self-defense and armed rebellion, even as he revered nonviolence. The book Stokely, A Life, by Peniel L. Joseph.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, that was an interesting day, the election day yesterday. Greetings. It's Wednesday, the day after Election Day. We still don't know if the Democrats or Republicans will control the House of Representatives or the Senate, but it's looking increasingly certain that the Republicans will take the House. The question is, will the Republicans in the House elect Kevin McCarthy as their Speaker? And there's a pretty good chance that the Senate might go Republican, but it may remain 50-50. We'll just have to wait and see. But it was, the red wave that was predicted appears to have been, as the photo over at Democratic Underground shows, that red wave appears to have been Donald Trump's hand waving out of the ocean as his red maggot hat is kind of floating in the water. Not so much of a red wave. And where did the blue wave, as it were, or where did the non-red wave come from? Almost entirely Zoomers. It wasn't the boomers who did it. People over 65 went for the Republicans by 13 points. It wasn't the Gen Xers who did it. People 45 to 64 went for Republicans by 11 points. It was sort of maybe the 30 to 44-year-olds. What generation is that? Gen Y, I guess? The millennials. Yeah, thank you, Sean. And, they went for Democrats by 2 points. But look at this, 18 to 29, the Zoomers, the Generation Z, 18 to 29, went for Democrats by 28 points. The Zoomers did their job. And in fact, Maxwell Frost, a Zoomer who was on our program, he's 25 years old, Afro-Cuban young man down in Florida, won his seat, the first Gen Z member of Congress. This is just like great news. So, we're going to invite him back on and see what he has to say these days. In Pennsylvania, of course, and I'm just going to do a massive data dump for you here. I'll give you my take on this afterwards, but first let's just do a roundup of what we know so far and what it means. In Pennsylvania, both Mehmet Oz and Doug Mastriano lost. That's the good news. In New Hampshire, Don Baldock, the litter box fetishist, lost his race. In Arizona, Blake Masters is running behind Mark Kelly. And Kerry Lake is still trailing Katie Hobbs, the Democrat. Appears to be good news. In Georgia, there's going to be a runoff between Herschel and Herschel Walker and Reverend Warnock. We'll see, how that shakes out. But my guess is that Warnock will win that runoff. I think his voters are going to be much more animated and enthusiastic than Walker's. And in fact, Brian Kemp walked away with the election last night in Georgia. There were an awful lot of people who voted for Brian Kemp and then voted either for the Libertarian or even voted for Warnock. And they just couldn't bring themselves. Republicans just couldn't bring themselves to vote for Herschel Walker. And in Colorado, again, all the numbers aren't in, but it looks like Lauren Boebert may be losing to Adam Frisch. All 6 of the insurrectionists who were running for Secretary of State around the country. These were the races that had most of us really, waking up in the middle of the night. All 6 of those insurrectionists running for the Secretary of State offices were defeated. Now, DeSantis is continuing to push himself as, the most electable fascist in America. We'll talk about that in just a moment. But here's some other good news of things that happened. These are from this is from Ruth Ben-Ghiat's newsletter, by the way, this morning. Last night we saw elected the first African American governor of Maryland, Wes Moore, the first Jewish governor of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro, the first Muslim Georgia state representative, Ruah Roman, the first Muslim Texas state representative, Salon Bohanji, the first black lieutenant governor, and the first black congresswoman in Pennsylvania, Austin Davis and Summer Lee, the first lesbian governor in the United States, Maura Healey in Massachusetts, the first immigrant LGBTQ person in Congress, Robert Garcia, a gay man, the first gay and first woman Vermont state representative, Becca Ballant, the first transgender members of state legislatures, James Resner in New Hampshire and Zooey Zephyr in Montana. The first lesbian in the Missouri state legislature, Ashley Bland Manlove, and the first openly bisexual Pennsylvania state representative, Jessica Benhan. So, some substantial victories there. Michiganders vote to enshrine abortion rights in state constitution is the headline over at Mediaite. Voters in Michigan voted to add reproductive rights to the state's constitution. That's a big deal, putting it into the Constitution. It's not going to be easy to get out. In Kentucky, there was a ballot measure. The Republicans in the Kentucky legislature passed a sweeping abortion ban. And they were so certain that the voters of the state were with them that they even put a law, essentially a proposed constitutional amendment to outlaw abortion on the ballot. And that was defeated. Now, the law, the anti-abortion law still stands, but at least in Kentucky, the constitutional amendment was blown away. By the way, open lines today. Your thoughts on the election, things that trends that you think you're seeing, things that you're spotting, things that concern you, things that make you feel wonderful. I mean, whatever it may be, feel free to give us a shout. We're going to just have this conversation for 3 hours. It's you and me and no guests today. Politico is reporting South Dakota votes to expand Medicaid. That program will take effect in July. Now, again, this was not the legislature. South Dakota's legislature, solidly Republican. They've been fighting Medicaid expansion. The Inflation Reduction Act actually threw another 5% in for states that expand Medicaid. It was that the federal government picked up 90% of the cost, and the state only had to pay 10% of the cost to expand Medicaid to all of their low-income working people in the state. But South Dakota was still, hey, crap on the low-income working people. We're Republicans. We don't give a damn about them. Well, the voters of South Dakota do give a damn, and they voted. So now over 40,000 South Dakotans, 56% support in the election, will have access to Medicaid. This is the 7th state in the last 5 years to expand Medicaid via ballot initiative. In fact, the opponents of Medicaid expansion even tried to put this thing on the ballot that would have required 60% of the voters to approve this was in the last election. That got knocked down. And the Kaiser Family Foundation estimates that those incentives are going to send $110 million to South Dakota. 38 states now. This makes 39 states that have expanded Medicaid. It used to be there were 12 Republican states that refused to give health care to low-income working people. Now it's only 11. So in Florida, however, that's not going to change because DeSantis has gotten his 60% threshold into law to amend the Constitution or even pass any ballot measures. They're going heavily on that. Donald Trump, this is hysterical. Donald Trump is running around saying, "Don't blame me, blame Melania." honest to God, I'm not making this up. He is telling people that Mehmet Oz's, the choice of Mehmet Oz for Pennsylvania was Melania's idea, and it was a bad idea. Gee. He's also, Dan Baldock was the guy who was insisting there were kitty litter boxes in the schools in New Hampshire, running against Maggie Hassan, and he lost. And he was endorsed by Trump, and so Trump is now saying that, well, he wasn't strong enough on his election denial. He had to be more supportive of me, basically, and say that I actually won the election. And then he was interviewed by News Nation last night, and he said, well, I think if they win, I should get all the credit. If they lose, I should not be blamed at all. And then he went on to brag about how he was responsible for Ron DeSantis. Over at The Writing, Rightting, over at The Writing, they're talking about how the Dems, this Gateway Pundit, the headline, Dems steal midterms as communism comes home to America. And Washington Examiner blamed Trump for weak Republican performance. I'm going to get to that in just a second. I think this is the end of the road for Donald Trump. DeSantis shows he's the future. Now, these are all from Rupert Murdoch, right? The New York Post, the headline, DeSantis shows he's the future of the GOP. The Wall Street Journal, the DeSantis Florida tsunami. Fox News, DeSantis is the new Republican Party leader. And I think, if Rupert Murdoch, you get a right-wing billionaire behind something, it happens. Look at what happened with J.D. Vance in Ohio. He had a major right-wing billionaire funding him. And surprise, surprise, he beat Tim Ryan, although it shouldn't be surprise, surprise, because the Democratic Party didn't throw any money into that race, which is bizarre. But, hey, what can you do? Conservatives are starting to blame Donald Trump right now. Michael Dougherty over at National Review, he says, all the chatter on my conservative and Republican channels is rage at Trump like I've never seen. The one guy he attacked before Election Day was DeSantis, the clear winner. Meanwhile, all his guys are crapping the bed. GOP source tells me after tonight the Trump candidate's underperforming and DeSantis winning by double digits, 2024 is a free-for-all, said Real Clear Politics reporter Phil Wegman. He said, everybody is in the water. If you want to take on Trump, he's never been weaker. And as I mentioned, Trump is blaming Melania for the whole Oz thing. It's amazing. In fact, the New York Post headline, "De-future." Not de-sanctimonious, de-future. Maggie Haberman is, the New York Times reporter, is reporting that Trump is, quote, frequently in a state of near rage. His increasingly violent attacks on Speaker Pelosi, demanding jail sentences for reporters, saying he wants to shoot drug dealers in the head, recounting grisly crimes in detail in his rallies. By the way, Haberman is reporting Mr. Trump had to be talked out of announcing his own presidential campaign on Monday night by advisors, family members, and Republican leaders, according to several people who were there. Instead, he's going to report it sometime next week. And meanwhile, Donald Trump is saying that about Ron DeSantis, I will tell you things about him that won't be very flattering. I know more about him than anybody other than perhaps his wife. I don't know that he's running. I think if he runs, he could hurt himself very badly. So Donald Trump threatening Ron DeSantis. On the other side of the break, I'll share my take on all this with you. Stick around.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And, of course, we'll be picking up your phone calls all day. What does this mean to you? What's happened in your state? How did it work? How did the voting go in your state? What's your sense of how things are going in the future? And welcome back. Kenyatta in Los Angeles. Hey, Kenyatta, what's on your mind today?
Well, I got to tell you that I am being nonpartisan and not a big fan of the duopoly that are the two parties. As I've said many times to you, I caucus with the Democrats. And so I am refreshed that they did a lot better than I would have anticipated, because I was thinking that, as they say now, top of mind would have been the economy and inflation. But clearly, Democrats were more concerned about other things. And I think that for the Democrats, Donald Trump was very much on the ballot, where Joe Biden for the Democrats was not. And the good news is that it was clearly a repudiation of Agent Orange. The bad news is that it's an affirmation of DeSantis. And DeSantis, I believe, Tom, is a much more dangerous distilled version of Donald Trump. That's just my opinion.
Yeah. What I'm hearing with regard to DeSantis down in Florida, and I'm looking forward to seeing the numbers, you know, when they start taking apart these numbers, is that when he paraded those 15 black men in front of, actually, I think one of them was a woman, in front of the cameras in shackles as they were hauling them off to arrest them for illegally voting, that was probably one of the most successful suppressions of the black vote in modern history, that the black vote just collapsed in Florida as a result of that.
Well, is it any wonder?
Yeah, no, I'm not surprised at all by that. I mean, you know, it's, yeah, but that tells me that Ron DeSantis is willing to go full fascist to gain power.
Absolutely. Oh, there's no question.
He's the biggest threat to America right now. I don't think Trump is that big a threat anymore. No,
he is I use the word distilled, you can say refined, if you will, version of Trump.
Yep.
And I'm not sure, and I'm wondering if the Democrats, you know, because I'm Gen X, I'm wondering what they were, if the Supreme Court was somewhere in the back of their minds, given this activism by the court, and because that's a lot of people are very concerned about that. Now, I don't know if that's the case, Tom, because the average American can't name 3 of the 9 Supreme Court justices.
Right.
But I don't know. It may have been something that was, you know, they were unconscious of. I wanted to say in closing that the one thing that worries me is that no one seemed to be concerned, and I know it's a midterm, about foreign policy. And You've spoken with me enough to know that foreign policy is, I'm going to use it again, top of mind for me, because it's going to dictate domestic policy. And it looks like neither party has a real handle on foreign policy, and that worries me a great deal.
Yeah, that's a good observation. The thing that shocked me, Kenyatta, was that there wasn't a larger turnout for Democrats as a result of the Dobbs decision. I was convinced that even Republican women were going to say, "Screw this," but they didn't. They stuck with the GOP by and large.
Well, that's interesting you say that, because the Republicans also kind of fell flat in terms of the numbers that turned out. Now, maybe they were overconfident. The last thing I wanted to say to you, Tom, real quick, is that one thing that this does guarantee, and that's more gridlock. Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, it's the next 2 years are going to be hell with the Republicans in charge of the House. Kenyatta, thanks a lot for the call. It's great to hear from you. We'll be right back. 22 minutes past the hour. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. There are no good solid numbers on it, but it appears that the majority of people who have Medicare Advantage programs or plans believe that they're on Medicare. This is certainly how Medicare Advantage is sold. Oh, you're missing out on benefits under Medicare. It's Medicare Part C, don't you know? C for commercial, right? But people don't realize that when you sign up for Medicare Advantage, you are leaving behind Medicare, and you may never be able to get back to it, or at least not in the way that you could have if you had signed up for it when you were 65 and you stayed with it. And now stepping into this void come Congressman Mark Pocan and Congressman Ro Khanna with the new Save Medicare Act that would prevent this kind of deceptive advertising and marketing by forbidding insurance companies and HMOs and whatnot from using the word Medicare to sell these for-profit plans or these so-called Medicare Advantage plans. We all need to be supportive of this. There's a whole video about it over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. "24 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. Okay, my take on all this, and I basically laid this out in my op-ed today over at hartmannreport.com, is
and Kenyatta and I were just talking a moment ago, and I said he had some really, really thoughtful observations, and what I tossed in was, and following up on his comment about the Democrats losing control of the House, is that the next 2 years are going to be hell. I mean, you are going to see investigations of Hunter Biden's laptop. You're going to, all this stuff. But Ron DeSantis, in my opinion, is the major threat here to America at the moment. He is willing to do or say anything. He has got it down. He uses Trump. Trump constantly does the white power signal sign with his hands as he's talking. DeSantis is doing that all the time. He's using Trump's gestures. He's wearing boxy blue suits like Trump does. I mean, he had it down. Well, now, just in the last week, he's shifted away from looking and talking like Trump. He's starting to kind of come up with his own brand. And now he's got Rupert Murdoch, this former Australian billionaire, and this giant media machine behind him. This morning on Fox and Friends, they were talking about, everybody we talk to loves Ron DeSantis. He's doing so well. And, of course, the Wall Street Journal bragging on him, and the Daily News, the New York Post. But the bottom line is, this looks to me, what Donald Trump was peddling to America was pure fascism. What Ron DeSantis is peddling to Florida is friendly fascism. They are different, not so much in degree as in patina, as in surface, as in the way that they present, the face that they present to the public. But DeSantis is smarter than Trump. He's more competent than Trump. He actually has a law degree from an Ivy League college, I believe from Yale. He's going to make, I think Trump is toast now. And feel free to let me know if you think I'm wrong on this. But I think the next year is going to be the worst year of his life. But DeSantis, he's on a roll, and it's going to continue. And in part, this is because he succeeded in basically buttoning up Florida. He pushed through his own map for redistricting that was arguably unconstitutional, but hey, it's there anyway. He's wired the state. You can't even get a ballot initiative now without 60 to win without 60% of the vote in the state. It's his election police. It appears very successfully suppressed the black vote down in Florida. So this is what he wants to bring to America.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
I think much of the discussion in America over the next 2 years is going to be, do we really, are we ready to go fascist, or are we ready to repudiate it? It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study by Stefano Harney and Fred Moten. This is from the introduction. It starts with love, exchange, fellowship. It ends as it begins, in motion, in between various modes of being and belonging, and on the way to new economies of giving, taking, being with and for. And it ends with a ride in a Buick Skylark on a way to another place altogether. Surprising, perhaps, after we have engaged dispossession, debt, dislocation, and violence, but not surprising when you have understood that the projects of fugitive planning and black study are mostly about reaching out to find connection. They are about making common cause with the brokenness of being, a brokenness, I would venture to say, that is also blackness, that remains blackness, and will, despite all, remain broken, because this book is not a prescription for repair. If we do not seek to fix what has been broken, then what? How do we resolve to live with brokenness, with being broke, which is also what Moten and Harney called debt? Well, given that debt is sometimes a history of giving, at other times a history of taking, at all times a history of capitalism, and given that debt also signifies a promise of ownership but never delivers on that promise, we have to understand that debt is something that cannot be paid off. Debt, as Harney puts it, presumes a kind of individualized realization to a naturalized economy that is predicated upon exploitation. Can we have, he asks, another sense of what is owed that does not presume a nexus of activities like recognition and acknowledgement, payment and gratitude? Can debt become a principle of elaboration? Moten links economic debt to the brokenness of being in the interview with Stefan Shukatis, who he acknowledges that some debts should be paid and that much is owed, especially to black people, by white people. And yet he says, I also know that it is, that what it is that is supposed to be repaired is irreparable. It can't be repaired. The only thing we can do is tear this stuff down completely and build something new, end of quote. The undercommons do not come to pay their debts, to repair what has been broken, to fix what has been undone. If you want to know what the undercommons wants, what Moten and Harney want, what black people, indigenous people, queers, and poor people want, what we, the we who cohabit in the space of the undercommons want, it is this. We cannot be satisfied with the recognition and acknowledgement generated by the very system that denies A, that anything was ever broken, and B, that we deserve to be the broken part. So we refuse to ask for recognition, and instead we want to take apart, dismantle, tear down that structure right now. That right now limits our ability to find each other, to see beyond it, and to access the places that we know live outside its walls. We cannot say what new structures will replace the ones we live with yet, because once we have torn stuff down, we will inevitably see more and see differently and feel a new sense of wanting and being and becoming. What we want after the break will be different from what we think we want before the break, and both are necessarily different from the desires that issue from being in the dark. Let's come at this by another path. In the melancholic and visionary 2009 film version of Maurice Sendak's Where the Wild Things Are, 1963, Max, the small seeker who leaves his room, his home, his family to find the world beyond, finds a world of lost and lonely beasts, and they promptly make him their king. Max is the first king the wild things have had, whom they did not eat, and who did not, in turn, try to eat them. And the beasts are the first grown things that Max has met, who want his opinion, his judgment, and his rule. Max's power is that he is small while they are big. He promises the beasts that he has no plans to eat them, and that this is more than anyone has ever promised them. He promises them that he will find ways through and around and will slip through the cracks and re-crack the cracks if they fill up. He promises to keep sadness at bay and to make the world with the wild creatures that roared their terrible roars and gnashed their terrible teeth and rolled their terrible eyes and showed their terrible claws. That Max fails to make the wild things happy or to save them or to make the world with them is less important than the fact that he found them and he recognized in them the end of something and potentially the path to an alternative in his world, or an alternative to his world, excuse me. The wild things were not the utopian creatures of fairy tales. They were the rejected and lost subjects of the world Max had left behind. And because he shuttles between the Oedipal land where his mother rules and the ruined world of the wild, he knows the parameters of the real. He sees what is included and what is left out. And he is now able to set sail for another place, a place that is neither the home he left nor the home to which he wants to return. Moten and Harney want to gesture to another place, a wild place that is not simply the leftover space that limbs real and regulated zones of polite society. Rather, it is a wild place that continuously produces its own unregulated wilderness. The zone we enter through Moten and Harney is ongoing and exists in the present, and as Harney puts it, some kind of demand is already being enacted, fulfilled in the call itself. While describing the riots of London in 2011, Harney suggests that the riots and insurrections do not separate out the request, the demand, and the call. Rather, they enact the one in the other. The book is The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. So what did the election mean to you? What are you seeing in your state? How is this going to change things in the future? What's it going to do about Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis? How is it going to affect the future of politics in your particular state? What do you think if the Republicans take the House? which it is by the minute increasingly looking like it's going to be the case, how is that going to change politics? Obviously, it's going to paralyze the Biden agenda. Is that going to be enough to position Ron DeSantis to become president in 2024? Do you agree with my analysis that Donald Trump is toast now? I think, all it's going to take is a serious indictment from, the Justice Department, or even Letitia James or Fani Willis down in Georgia, that exposes his criminality. I mean, and I'm not even talking about his election and presidential criminality, but his just, sleazy criminality. His, like his son-in-law working out a $2 billion deal with the Saudis while he's pretending to work for the United States. It's just, just the raw, corrupt criminality of the Trump family, the Trump crime family. I think they're going down. So what say you? Kate in New York City. Hey, Kate, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. So I have a two-part question about Congress. If the Dems were to lose the House and the January 6th committee gets disbanded, but we were able to gain the Senate, could they create a Senate Select Committee on January 6th that picks up where the House committee leaves off? And if so, could that plan be stymied if Manchin and Sinema flip to Republican and thus give the Senate back to the GOP?
Yeah, or simply choose to blow it up somehow, which I frankly doubt would happen. Yes, if the House goes away and the January 6th committee goes away, Democrats could create a January 6th committee in the Senate. It would be up to Chuck Schumer, who won his reelection last night. And, presumably the House could just hand everything to them and say, here you go, have fun. I think that they would be well advised to do it, frankly. But on the other hand, they may at this point say, Trump is toast. We're just going to leave it to the Department of Justice, and we're going to get on about the business of the country or something like that. I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see, Kate. You raised a great question. But in terms of the technical possibilities, yeah, that would be possible. The other thing, as I mentioned yesterday, and as you just mentioned right now, Kate, is what happens if either Manchin or Sinema decides to change their affiliation to Republican. I don't know that they're going to do that. We'll see. We'll see. Did I answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Kate. Yep. Good talking to you. Paul in Ambler, Pennsylvania. Hey, Paul, what's on your mind?
Well, it's always sunny in Philadelphia. It's a great day for the Democrats.
You did have a great day, yeah. Both your gubernatorial race and your senatorial race.
Well, the top of the ticket is the governor, Josh Shapiro, and a small correction. The second Jewish governor of Pennsylvania, the first one was Milton Schaap, who was governor when I was in high school.
Oh, really?
Back in the 70s, yeah.
Have you, you live in Pennsylvania. I'm assuming you have seen some of Shapiro's speeches. I have been saying for some time now, I think that Gavin Newsom has a real shot at becoming president, not just the Democratic nominee, but becoming president. He's a really great speaker. But I was blown away by Josh Shapiro. I think he has, this guy's a very gifted politician. He's a Bill Clinton level quality in terms of presentation.
I don't think people know what's coming at them when you're dealing with Josh. He happens to be from the township where I was a committee person, so I know him, reasonably well. There's a whole group of people that have come out of that township. Our congressperson, Madeline Dean, is also from Abington Township. These are all people who came up through the ranks together. Mm-hmm. They're very well educated, but at the same time, they started off as committee people and volunteers for other politicians. And, this whole area is just so heavily influenced by the Great Deal and the Great Society legislation and unionism. Yeah. People don't really get the Philadelphia area when they try to do an analysis, especially politically. The other thing is John Fetterman, he won. Now, he's from Western Pennsylvania, and there is sort of a divide between the Pittsburgh, Western Pennsylvania, but that has more to do with the wealthy people, the Mellons and the Scapes and, the Carnegies versus the rich people who are in Philadelphia. The rest of the people who are, not of the the wealthy 1% class, they have more in tune with one another. I met John Fetterman when he had a campaign. He had to come east. He had to come to the Philadelphia area. He had to come to the suburbs where I was at, and he had to introduce himself because we never heard of the guy before. Mm-hmm. He was very impressive, although he did not speak as much. But the other thing that's going on that it's very important, we lost the congressional district due to the census. So we went from 18 to 17 congressional districts, and somebody had to get written out. Well, that one somebody was supposed to be Susan Wild, who was one of the 4 women who was elected the last time around. I think
who was a Democrat, right?
Election. Yeah, Democrat, right. Mm-hmm. So we had the worst gerrymandered districts in the country, and one of them was so bad. It used to look like Donald. They used to call it Donald Duck. At any rate, we went from something like 14 or 15 Republican Congress people and only 4 or 5 Democrats to split 9 and 9. Yeah. Well, as of this morning, the majority of the congressional delegation of Pennsylvania is now Democratic.
That's great.
9 out of the 17 are Democratic.
I have, since you knew Josh Shapiro coming up, I have a question for you. Watching his speech a couple nights ago, I was struck. I'm like just super auditory. It's my primary sense, and I really pay attention to how people speak. And just like I've been noticing that Ron DeSantis has been imitating Donald Trump, I was surprised. I didn't quite know what to make of it. Josh Shapiro, a guy from the Northeast, was speaking using the cadence and even the slight Southern accent of Barack Obama. It was almost like you could have closed your eyes and listening to Josh Shapiro thought, oh my God, I'm listening to Barack Obama. Speak to that.
I get what you're saying. I'm trying to remember the schools that he went to. I think the University of Maryland. I think if I recall correctly, he had got his undergraduate degree or his law degree from there. So, if you
so you might have picked up an accent there rather than trying to just take it from Obama.
Yeah. But the other thing is Philadelphia. They call Philadelphia is the northernmost southern city. Now,
interesting.
That might be true when you're talking about the Protestants, but the Irish Catholic, the Italians, the Jews, not so much.
Yeah.
But the influence of the African Americans who've all come primarily from the Carolinas and South Carolina, I think the bulk of them, their speech pattern has just intermingled along with all the other intermingling going on in Philadelphia.
So Josh Shapiro was just talking the way he talks. He wasn't imitating Barack Obama. Interesting. Look, these people are professionally astute. They have to do something. Yeah, and you can do worse than imitate Obama. The guy is one of the most gifted orators of our generation.
And Obama, of course, he had to learn too. I mean, one of the things that I did when I was in the high school debate club is they put me in front of a video camera and they started to ring your accent out. So instead of me saying water, I had to learn to say water.
Right.
I had to start pronouncing T.
I've been through it.
I stopped calling creek. I used to call it the crick.
Yep, that's a Michiganism too. Paul, I got to move along, but thank you for the call and thanks for all the information on Pennsylvania. It's great to hear from you. I'm just loving this. I'll give you my take on Oregon a little later on in the program, my 2-minute take, but I'm trying to get your 2-minute takes, as it were, here on what's going on in your state. Paul in Wichita, Kansas. Hey, Paul, what's up with you?
Hi, Tom. I'll try to make it quick. When I was at the poll voting, I was pleased that I was able to capture an image of my ballot on my cell phone, and extremely disappointed after I left the poll and looked at the image. Now, even though the barcode across the top had high contrast and looked like it was readable with a barcode reader, below that, the list of candidates I voted for were in a different font. They were very light color, And even though I zoomed in on it on the image, I still is illegible.
Well, the scanners only read the dot that you put on there. They don't read the name. They just read the dot, and they know the position to look for the dot. So that's not anything to worry about.
Kansas, okay. Well, in Kansas, when the paper comes out after you vote electronically, it does have a list of names on it. I read.
Right.
Okay.
Well, that's so you can
correct.
double check that you voted for who you voted for.
I can.
Yeah.
They will. They told me at the election office they will never know who you voted for.
Well, if the ballot, did you vote on a machine that prints a ballot and then the ballot is put in a box where it's run through a scanner? Is that what you're describing, Paul?
Well, almost. It goes from my hand to a poll worker's hand and into the tabulator.
Right. So I'd have to look at it. But what's your concern or objection? I'm missing that, Paul.
Well, at one point, the poll worker said, "Oh, you can't do that," when she saw I was using my cell phone. Right. And I checked with the local election officer in person a month earlier, and the guy was like, can I take a photo of that piece?
The laws on that vary from state to state. I don't know what the laws are in Kansas, but you should be able to look it up, Paul. It shouldn't be a big deal. It's 46 minutes, and in most states, actually, it is illegal to bring a camera into a polling station, and that's to protect the privacy of the other people there. It's 46 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
A big day, a big election, a lot going on. Your thoughts on all of it right after this. And welcome back. Joan in Rochester, Minnesota. Hey, Joan, what's on your mind today?
Well, this is more about what the results could bring us. Mm-hmm. I wonder if the Trumpers are aware that they are advocating Nazism and authoritarianism, and their parents were immigrants who fled that type of rule and came to a new free country to prosper and be free and have a good life for their family. They are worried. They're just doing a bad thing as far as their ancestors are concerned, because I think they would not appreciate the fact that these Trumpers that are out spewing things and advocating Nazism and authoritarianism are just what they had left Europe for and tried to get away from. And they should be thinking about that and respect their families more than they're doing right now. And that's what I really feel in my heart.
Amen.
They owe their families respect and consideration for what they did for them that are here now and that are turning against what they stood for when their parents came.
Well said, Joan. Well said. And we need to amplify that more frequently. Thank you very much for that. Len in Woodmere, New York. Hey, Len, what's on your mind today?
Hi. I think we're already operating here with a failure of imagination. I don't remember when and for what exact reason in the past a number of Republican Congress people suddenly shifted, Democratic Congress people suddenly shifted to Republicans. And I think... are you talking
about the elections making those shifts, or individual members?
No. People change. A couple of, I think, Democratic Congress people soon after an election, changed their affiliation to Republicans.
There was a lot of that in the late '60s as a result of the Civil Rights Act and Voting Rights Act, but there hasn't been a whole lot since then. The only one I know of is Jim Justice, the governor of West Virginia, who was elected as a Democrat.
But there were,
you had Jesse Helms. There was a bunch of those guys back in the day.
The point is, if this is only within a couple of members difference, who that the Republicans control, the Democrats have to one by one in the media and in other methods. Invite all those Republicans, and we all know that there are a good number of them who are really nauseated by what they have to sit and listen to. That they should be invited to take part in a big symposium, public symposium, on who they might be interested in seeing Speaker of the House other than Nancy Pelosi, who they can agree to support, even if it's amongst a Republican even if it comes to a Republican who switches to a Democrat, in order to, if a lot of people agree that, okay, let's make this person, see, I don't know any of them, I can't name it, but let's make this Republican switching to a Democrat the Speaker of the House. Let's return to normalcy. Let's just once and for all negate this election.
There's going to be a big battle here. I mean, Kevin McCarthy is hanging on by his fingernails, and
I want the battle to be with Democrats. I don't want it to be with other.
I get that, Len. It ain't going to happen, though. You're not going to find enough Republicans who are willing to change parties. Frankly, I don't think you'll find any in the current environment who are willing to change to become Democrats. But this whole and thanks for the call. This whole battle for the Speaker of the House is going to be fascinating. Stay tuned on that one, too. We'll be right back. Hey, I have a new book out. It's called The Hidden History of Neoliberalism, How Reaganism Gutted America and How to Restore Its Greatness. Greg Palast calls it a hand grenade of a book. You can pick it up wherever fine books are available. Tag you're it. If you believe that someone is a billionaire without seeing their taxes, if you believe someone is a genius if they hide their college grades, if you believe someone is a great businessman if they bankrupted casinos, if you believe somebody is an irresistible ladies' man if they have to pay for sex or even accused of rape, if you believe somebody is a philanthropist if their charity got shut down for fraud and their children had to go through mandatory training about how not to commit fraud with philanthropies. If you believe someone is a patriot, if they got out of the draft during a time of war by submitting phony, dodgy x-rays showing bone spurs, if you believe someone is a Christian who doesn't go to church and doesn't know what 2 Thessalonians is, if you believe someone is an innocent man if they refuse to testify, well, you're not just gullible, you're a Trump supporter. I have a whole video about this over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. Welcome back. We are processing what has happened in the last 24 hours here, and will be for the 3 hours of the program. Stella in Fort Worth, Texas. What's up with you? What's on your mind?
Well, I'm not singing Happy Days Are Here Again, okay?
Oh, I get that. Yeah, Beto, I was astonished by the margin by which Beto lost.
Yeah, I was too. That was the part that did surprise me. But I just wanted to ask you a question. I thought I heard you say that the voters 65 and older went for the GOP by 13 percentage points. Which amazes me, with the threats against Social Security. What is your take on why that particular demographic tends to vote for the GOP?
I think as people get older, they tend to get more conservative. I mean, there's an old Winston Churchill, famous Winston Churchill quote about that. You've got that. That voter cohort of 65 plus is huge and reliable in terms of voting. And I believe that if the Democrats had done a really good job of messaging Social Security, and they were pushing it in some places. I mean, you had a couple of Republicans actually essentially forced. Ron Johnson was one of them, forced to come out and say, "Oh no, I'm not going to cut Social Security. It's not my idea." That shows that is a potent political issue. But the Democrats, they were handed that knife by the Republicans, but they chose not to use it. And this is part of the post-mortem, I think. But Stella, I think that's what's going on. Stella, thank you for the call and thanks for the report from Texas. Val in Raleigh, North Carolina. Hey, Val, what's on your mind today?
Hello, Tom. Tom, how are you?
I am great, but I'll get better. Val, how about you?
I'm doing fine. I wanted to talk about how we have no reason to cheer here in North Carolina necessarily. What happened to us, we lost every judicial race, every statewide judicial race, and now the Supreme Court is in the hands of Republicans. On top of that, we lost the U.S. Senate race, and House Speaker Moore, he doesn't care now whether Moore v. Harper, which is a case going to be reviewed by the court here pretty soon, he doesn't care how that ends because he got a super majority in the state house now. And we missed having a super majority in the Senate by one seat. That's nothing to cheer about here in North Carolina.
That's
so
amazing.
We may not have had a tsunami yesterday, but it was a Category 5 hurricane nonetheless.
Yeah, in a bad way for North Carolina. Yep.
Absolutely. That's all I wanted to say.
Okay, thanks a lot, Val. Good to hear from you. David in Phoenix. Hey, David, what's up?
Yeah, Tom, thanks for taking my call. Yeah, I just thought it might be helpful to your listeners to kind of know what's going on here in Arizona as far as the vote is concerned, because it was quite interesting because the mail-in ballots put the Democrats ahead by about 20 points in all these races. And then, of course, it shrinked really quick because then the election day in-voter in-person voting is very heavily Republican, at least 3/4 Republican. And I even noticed a large number of minorities that were voting Republican, too. So that brought it way down. That's why it's so extremely close right now. So it kind of all depends on the mail-in votes that were dropped off. And back in 2020, if you didn't have a 3 or 4 point lead, you ended up losing by just a little bit. And so I'm looking at the fact that using that scenario, Mark Kelly should be able to take this, and Adrian Fontes, our Secretary of State, should be able to make it. It's going to be
There is a slight difference, though. I mean, in 2020, we had a pandemic going on, and Democrats were taking it seriously, and Republicans were laughing at it. And so that Democratic swing to the mail-in votes was much more exaggerated 2 years ago than it is now.
Yeah. There's a lot going on with that. That's true, Tom.
It is.
Yeah.
David, thanks for the call. Thanks for the report from Arizona. I really appreciate it. It's great to hear from you. We will continue this conversation on the other side of the break. Excuse me. We'll be back. It's the day after the election. There's still a lot of results to come. And, we'll find out who's going to control the House and Senate probably in the next 24 to 48 hours. Stick around. We'll be back with your reports from your states.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study by Stefano Harney and Fred Moten. This is from the introduction. It starts with love, exchange, fellowship. It ends as it begins, in motion, in between various modes of being and belonging, and on the way to new economies of giving, taking, being with and for. And it ends with a ride in a Buick Skylark on a way to another place altogether. Surprising, perhaps, after we have engaged dispossession, debt, dislocation, and violence, but not surprising when you have understood that the projects of fugitive planning and black study are mostly about reaching out to find connection. They are about making common cause with the brokenness of being, a brokenness, I would venture to say, that is also blackness, that remains blackness, and will, despite all, remain broken because this book is not a prescription for repair. If we do not seek to fix what has been broken, then what? How do we resolve to live with brokenness, with being broke, which is also what Moten and Harney called debt? Well, given that debt is sometimes a history of giving, at other times a history of taking, at all times a history of capitalism, and given that debt also signifies a promise of ownership but never delivers on that promise, we have to understand that debt is something that cannot be paid off. Debt, as Harney puts it, presumes a kind of individualized realization to a naturalized economy that is predicated upon exploitation. Can we have, he asks, another sense of what is owed that does not presume a nexus of activities like recognition and acknowledgement, payment and gratitude? Can debt become a principle of elaboration? Moten links economic debt to the brokenness of being in the interview with Stefan Shukatis, who he acknowledges that some debts should be paid and that much is owed, especially to black people, by white people. And yet he says, I also know that it is, that what it is that is supposed to be repaired is irreparable. It can't be repaired. The only thing we can do is tear this stuff down completely and build something new, end of quote. The Undercommons do not come to pay their debts, to repair what has been broken, to fix what has been undone. If you want to know what the Undercommons wants, what Moten and Harney want, what black people, indigenous people, queers, and poor people want, what the we who cohabit in the space of the Undercommons want, it is this. We cannot be satisfied with the recognition and acknowledgement generated by the very system that denies A, that anything was ever broken, and B, that we deserve to be the broken part. So we refuse to ask for recognition, and instead we want to take apart, dismantle, tear down that structure right now. That right now limits our ability to find each other, to see beyond it, and to access the places that we know live outside its walls. We cannot say what new structures will replace the ones we live with yet, because once we have torn stuff down, we will inevitably see more and see differently and feel a new sense of wanting and being and becoming. What we want after the break will be different from what we think we want before the break, and both are necessarily different from the desires that issue from being in the dark. Let's come at this by another path. In the melancholic and visionary 2009 film version of Maurice Sendak's Where the Wild Things Are, 1963, Max, the small seeker who leaves his room, his home, his family to find the world beyond, finds a world of lost and lonely beasts, and they promptly make him their king. Max is the first king the wild things have had, whom they did not eat, and who did not, in turn, try to eat them. And the beasts are the first grown things that Max has met, who want his opinion, his judgment, and his rule. Max's power is that he is small while they are big. He promises the beasts that he has no plans to eat them, and that this is more than anyone has ever promised them. He promises them that he will find ways through and around, and will slip through the cracks and re-crack the cracks if they fill up. He promises to keep sadness at bay and to make the world with the wild creatures that roared their terrible roars and gnashed their terrible teeth and rolled their terrible eyes and showed their terrible claws. That Max fails to make the wild things happy or to save them or to make the world with them is less important than the fact that he found them and he recognized in them the end of something and potentially the path to an alternative in his world, or an alternative to his world, excuse me. The wild things were not the utopian creatures of fairy tales. They were the rejected and lost subjects of the world Max had left behind. And because he shuttles between the Oedipal land where his mother rules and the ruined world of the wild, He knows the parameters of the real. He sees what is included and what is left out. And he is now able to set sail for another place, a place that is neither the home he left nor the home to which he wants to return. Moten and Harney want to gesture to another place, a wild place that is not simply the leftover space that limbs real and regulated zones of polite society. Rather, it is a wild place that continuously produces its own unregulated wilderness. The zone we enter through Moten and Harney is ongoing and exists in the present, and as Harney puts it, some kind of demand is already being enacted, fulfilled in the call itself. While describing the riots of London in 2011, Harney suggests that the riots and insurrections do not separate out the request, the demand, and the call. Rather, they enact the one in the other. The book is The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to the second hour of our program. We're kind of processing what's happened in the last 24 hours election-wise, speculating about what it means. People are sharing their stories of what has happened in their particular states. And, your kind of 2-minute summary, as it were, of, hang on just a second. Your 2-minute summary of what's going on, in your state. Here in Oregon, we're seeing some interesting things. This is as of 9 a.m. this morning. One of the, Joanne Hardesty, who is probably the most progressive member of the Portland City Council, just lost her seat to Renee Gonzalez, who's also a Democrat, but far more conservative in law and order. This is a reflection of, here in Portland, of just people's rage or outrage or fear, frankly, of homeless people just camping all over the city, crapping in the streets and attacking people, a lot of mentally ill people. We have a friend who works with the homeless here in Portland, who was telling us the other day that many of the, shall we say, competent homeless people, the people who are not mentally ill, they're just like, they're on the streets because of economics, because of 40 years of Reaganomics. They have moved out of the city center, Portland, even though that's where all the services are. Some of them are walking as much as 10 miles a day. They walk out to the suburbs to have a place to sleep at night. They try to get out there before the sun goes down, and then they walk into town in the morning to get meals and medical services and things that are available in the city but not available out in the suburbs. Because the crime is so bad in the city, homeless people are coming into the city and being assaulted by other homeless people, and they just can't, they're leaving the city. I mean, I have this on good, a report that I trust from somebody that I know very, very well, who has been working with this population for over a year now, and it's amazing. It's amazing. So Tina Kotek, the Democrat running for governor here, has not yet declared victory, but thinks that there's a good chance she's going to beat the Republican who had the full support of Phil Knight, the founder of Nike and the richest man in Oregon, I believe. I think he's our wealthiest billionaire. And he had originally thrown money into Betsy Johnson's campaign, this renegade Democrat, former Democrat. And then when that didn't work, he just started pouring money directly into the Republican campaign. It was, the ads were just brutal. The ads were just terrible. We had Measure 14, 114, it's a gun control measure. It will make Oregon will have the strictest gun control restrictions in the nation. And the Oregonian, our newspaper here, is saying that it has passed. So that's an amazing story because the NRA and everybody else was, they were pouring money into stopping that ballot initiative here in the state of Oregon. And we're still waiting to hear what how the race is. Well, actually, several of the other races are going to shake out. But Jamie McLeod Skinner, who has been on our program twice, going up against a Republican in one of the kind of new districts or reorganized districts just south of Portland, the one where Kurt Schrader, the Democrat who was voting with Big Pharma and against the Biden administration, got kicked out because of that. That may become Republican. We'll just have to wait and see. So that's what's going on here. What's going on where you live, and what do you think it means? I think also the big news, and this is something that Democratic leadership needs to take a serious look at, because we've got, basically a gerontocracy now in the United States. We've got a president who's pushing 80. We've got, a Speaker of the House who's over 80. We've got a Senate leader who's approaching 80. That is a gerontocracy. And the over 65 vote, this is from the CNN National House exit poll, the over 65 vote went 13 points for Republicans nationwide. That should not have happened with the Republicans openly talking about how they want to gut Social Security. That's a failure of Democratic messaging. Now, I said that in the last hour. Several people on Twitter were saying, no, it's not that at all. It's that, most of the people who watch Fox News are over 65, and it's the poison of Fox News. Well, I don't disagree with that. But on a good night, Fox News has 3 million viewers. There are 340 million people in America. The electorate is in the neighborhood, depending on the election, and we don't have total numbers yet for yesterday, but typically midterms floating around 70, 80 million, national elections over, well over 100, 150 million. So, we'll see. We'll see what it is. But Republicans, the over 65 vote went to Republicans by 13 points. The 45 to 64 vote, the Gen Xer vote, went to Republicans by 11 points. And that's the population that's mostly listening to right-wing talk radio. And that's, again, a structural issue that the Democratic Party and Democratic leadership and Democratic donors need to deal with just $1 billion, which is, $9 billion, at least $9 billion was spent on this election yesterday. Probably it's when we ultimately find out what the numbers are, and we'll never find out the dark money numbers. But including those dark money numbers, I'd be surprised if it wasn't at least $15 billion was spent in the last couple of months on this election. If the Democratic Party just took $1 billion, and not even the Democratic Party, democratically aligned people, and used that to buy, say, 60 or 70 radio stations around the nation in states that can be changed, then that 45 to 64 vote, that's your talk radio listening audience, that 45 to 64-year-old vote would not be going 11 points for Republicans. Because, frankly, the Republicans are working against the interests of people who are approaching retirement age, which is that population. The 30 to 44 vote, your millennials, they went Democrat +2, Democratic, but the Zoomers were the ones who really carried the day. 18 to 29, 28% plus Democratic. They went Democratic by over 28%. That's huge. And that tells us that the Democratic Party damn well better start getting Zoomers into the party and getting them on ballots quickly. This is that 80-year cycle. This is the fourth turning. This is the fourth generation. You've got the boomers, the Gen Xers, the millennials, and now the Zoomers. And that's the fourth generation. It's, we tend to see these, you get, two very politically active generations, two very politically inactive generations, and the inactive generations, kind of bookend the politically active generations. It's just fascinating to watch. So, picking up your calls on all of this, Ron in Durango, Colorado. Hey, Ron, what's going on in Colorado?
Good talking again, Tom. As you know, Colorado had a much better day than some other parts of the country. but I wanted to call that there was a ballot initiative on the ballot that got almost no airplay nationally, and it looks like it's going to pass. But it's the legalization of psilocybin or shrooming for mental health, and that's going to be really big in the mental health industry when it comes to people with PTSD, with addictions, with depression issues, and it got almost no airplay. But wow. They had a similar program that was enacted in the Denver area where it was legalized in Denver. Great success with the mental health institutions there, and it went statewide, and it looks like it's going to win.
That's great. That's great. We decriminalized all drugs here in Oregon, and I've seen a few articles about the use of psilocybin, magic mushrooms, the stuff in mushrooms, and some of the other compounds as well. Psilocybin from mescaline, and bufatonin, even from toad skins. Being used for PTSD, and I don't know if it's become institutionalized here in Oregon, but it's a lot less dangerous than it was, before this. So that's great news. Ron?
I think it's great. So let's expect to see it go nationwide probably here in the next decade.
I think you're right. I think you're right because it works. Psychedelics work for PTSD and for intractable depression. Ron, thanks a lot for the call. 16 minutes past the hour. We will be back with more of your calls in just a moment. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, the place where despair is not an option.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Occupying the media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week. We'll be right back with your calls. And welcome back. Ron in Wheaton, Illinois. Hey, Ron. Thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. My call.
Ron, you're going to have to put your microphone right up to your mouth because I can't hear a word you're saying.
Talking to me? Okay. How's this? Is this better?
That's much better. What's up?
Okay. Thanks for taking my call twice in a year. I'm blessed beyond measure. About Pennsylvania Jewish governors, there's a third.
Really?
Michael Fisher was a high school classmate of mine, and he was defeated by Ed Rendell, whose parents were Jewish, and all four grandparents were Jewish.
Huh. Did Ed identify as Jewish? I don't know how to say it. Some people convert.
That I don't know, but I do know his ancestry. And I remember when my former classmate who lost, I was chuckling that he's a good Catholic kid, and he lost to a Jew.
That's interesting. That's very interesting.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for setting the record straight. That's fascinating. Thank you. Chris in Los Angeles. Hey, Chris, what's on your mind today?
Hi, I'm in LA, as you said. I just noticed that the turnout was 23.4% of eligible voters here.
Is that good or bad for Los Angeles?
Well, I think it's terrible.
Well, it's terrible in the abstract. I mean, isolated. But what was it 2 years ago? What was it 4 years ago?
Oh, I didn't follow that, Tom. Yeah. Sorry about that. But the problem is we have a mayoral race where there's a billionaire developer who spent well over $70 million, and he's running against Karen Bass, who's wonderful, and it's very, very close, so we don't even know yet.
So that race has not yet been called?
No, and he became a Democrat like 3 weeks before he filed.
Yeah.
Republican.
Yeah, what was his name?
Rick Caruso.
That's right, yeah. Well,
I wish more people.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it shakes out.
If more people had voted, it would be better, I think.
Yeah, I'm completely with you. More people voting is always a good thing. Thank you very much, Chris, for the call. Jim in Las Vegas. Hey, Jim, you've got a report?
Actually, kind of a little disappointed in the voter turnout here in Nevada with Governor Sisolak as well as Catherine Cortez Masto kind of trailing behind. However, there's a lot of mail-in ballots that have not been counted yet.
Yeah, John Ralston is saying he thinks that she's going to pull it out.
She may pull it out. She may pull it out. There's a lot of ballots that have not been counted yet that were mailed in. The question that I had, though, is that as a disabled veteran, when Trump was elected, they found out that he had 3 of his literal corporate goons down in Mar-a-Lago talking about how they could.
They were running the VA. Those 3 guys were running the VA. It was kind of a shadow VA leadership, if that's what you're talking about.
They were, but I wanted to see what your thoughts were about them trying to, if they take over, trying to privatize VA healthcare system.
Yeah, they were trying to privatize. They were setting up the VA for privatization during the Trump presidency, and the good news is President Biden will block that, but I think they'll try, Jim. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Democrats need to start campaigning on family values. It's a great platform. The Republicans have already kind of softened it up for us. What are family values? Well, Franklin Roosevelt talked about this. Lyndon Johnson talked about this. Jack Kennedy talked about this. Family values, strong public schools, a national health care program, and drug costs under control, getting these out-of-control pharmaceutical companies under control. Good pay for mom and dad when they're working, and unions. Outlaw homelessness by housing homeless people. Make it illegal for communities to encourage homelessness, basically, by not having enough housing available. Accept people across the entire LGBTQ spectrum into our families. That's a family value, a fundamental family value. Pure food. Our food supply, rather than polluting it with poisons and junk food, should be good. Our air and water need to be clean. Climate change, we need to get it under control. There's a whole video about this over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. Excuse me. Welcome back. 22 minutes past the hour. Picking up your calls. Bill in Clifton, New Jersey. Hey, Bill. What's going on in New Jersey?
Pretty good here. I mean, voting is easy, a lot easier. We have a thing where you go and you sign the register, and they give you a card with a slip. You go to the voting booth, and you write your name and signature on the card, and then he puts it in the machine. You do the whatever, choose whatever you want, and then you they don't pull the handle on you, but you send it, and then that card goes into a clear plastic like chute or something in front of you, and you get to see if everything that you voted for is on that. And that goes into a tabulator, I guess.
That's great.
But yeah. But anyway, and also someone was talking about mushrooms. I don't know if you know about CDN oil, another compound they found in cannabis.
Yeah, CBN is, we had an advertiser for a while that was selling CBN along with CBD as a sleep remedy, I think. Well, wasn't it CBN? Yeah, it was.
CBN is what THC becomes when you leave your pot in UV sunshine. And they found that the compound that they can make a sedative that's half the strength of Valium and has only 1/10 the psychoactive nature in it as Valium.
Right.
And
fewer
it's
side
not
effects.
related to alcohol, so you know, not addictive. But what I was calling about also is, Boebert was just replaced by a Jew.
Well, we'll see, but it looks that way. Yeah. I didn't realize that the guy she was running against is Jewish, but pardon?
Jews will not replace us.
Oh, yeah. I get it. Sorry, I missed that initially, Bill.
Right. But the Supreme Court, I think, is just a fault for doing that stupid Roe v. Wade decision. I think they swung the election too.
Yeah.
And
I think that was
wonder
the largest variable, frankly. I mean, there's a lot of people who want to speculate that it was Donald Trump that was swinging the election this way or that, the crazy of et cetera, et cetera. And I'll, let those narratives live out there. But I have to believe that the Dobbs decision was the major variable in this election.
Right. And do you think the billionaires are rethinking this one? Did they get their money's worth? And maybe
it wasn't that much money that they put in. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, you've got people who have $10 billion, $20 billion, $50 billion, $100 billion, and they're tossing $100 million, $200 million into an election. I mean, that's not even pocket change. That's pocket lint. That's money they don't even notice that they've lost. So no, I don't think that they're concerned about that. I think that we're going to see the billionaires back in a big way. In 2010. When Citizens United was decided, the billionaires put $10 million into the election. By 4 years later, in the next midterm election, 2014, I think it was up to like $120 million. 4 years after that, in the next midterm election, which was the 2020, that was 2018. Yeah, 4 years later, 2018. Then it was up to something like $400 million, $350 million. And this time it was $1 billion. I'm predicting that next, in 2 years, you're going to see the billionaires tossing in $3 or $4 billion. It's going to be huge. It's going to be a blowout. And the question is that going to be, will the media ever start reporting on this? Will we reach a point where we are so disgusted by the amount of money that's being poured into our politics by a very, very small number of people who basically are a special interest group, that we react to it? We had, for a short period of time here in Oregon, or here in Portland, we had public financing of elections. And if you took the public financing and your opponent didn't, then whatever your opponent spent, you got additional money. And we were getting reports about, this Republican who was pouring her own money into the race versus a Democrat who wasn't. And the Democrat kept getting more money from the state to match it. And it was like pissing people off. Our tax dollars are going to increase this, and the Republican lost. But it took that kind of a law to force the local media here to even talk about how much money was being spent. And so that's the sort of thing that I would love to see happen. And it's going to take public financing of elections in all probability to make it happen. And that ain't going to happen if we lose the House.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And it definitely ain't going to happen if we lose the Senate. So hang on. We're reading today from a book by David Sanger, the Pulitzer Prize-winning New York Times national security reporter. The title of the book is The Perfect Weapon: War, Sabotage, and Fear in the Cyber Age. We're reading from the preface. A year into Donald J. Trump's presidency, his defense secretary, Jim Mattis, sent the new commander-in-chief a startling recommendation. With nations around the world threatening to use cyber weapons to bring down America's power grids, cell phone networks, and water supplies, Trump should declare that he's ready to take extraordinary steps to protect the country. If any nation hit America's critical infrastructure with a devastating strike, even a non-nuclear one, it should be forewarned that the United States might reach for a nuclear weapon in response. Like most things in Washington, the recommendation leaked immediately. Excuse me. Many declared it a crazy idea and wild overkill. While nations had turned their cyber weapons against each other dozens of times in recent years, no attack had yet proven to cost a human life, at least directly. Not the American attacks on Iran's and North Korea's weapon programs, not the North Korean attacks on American banks, a famed Hollywood studio, and the British healthcare system, not the Russian attacks in Ukraine, Europe, and then at the core of American democracy. That streak of luck was certain to end soon, but why should Donald Trump or any of his successors take the huge risk of escalating a cyber war by going nuclear? The Pentagon's recommendation, it turned out, was the prelude to other proposals delivered to a president who values toughness and America first to use the nation's powerful cyber weapons far more aggressively. But it was also a reminder of how quickly the fear of devastating cyber attacks has moved from the stuff of science fiction and die-hard movies to the center of American defense strategy. Just over a decade before, in 2007, cyber attacks were missing entirely from the global threat assessment that intelligence agencies prepare each year for Congress. Terrorism topped that list, along with other post-9/11 concerns. Now that hierarchy has been reversed. For several years, a variety of cyber threats, ranging from a paralyzing strike on the nation's cities to a sophisticated effort to undercut public confidence in its institutions, has appeared as the nation's #1 threat on the list. Not since the Soviets tested the bomb in 1949 had the perception of threats facing the nation been revised so quickly. Yet Mattis, who had risen to 4-star status in a career focused in the Middle East, feared that the 2 decades spent chasing al-Qaeda and ISIS around the globe had distracted America from its most potent challenges. Great power competition, not terrorism, is now the primary focus of U.S. national security, he said in early 2018. America's, quote, competitive edge has eroded in every domain of warfare, including the newest one, cyberspace. The nuclear strategy he handed Trump gave voice to an inchoate fear among many in the Pentagon that cyber attacks posed a threat unlike any other, one that we had completely failed to deter. The irony is that the United States remains the world's stealthiest, most skillful cyber power, as the Iranians discovered when their centrifuges spun out of control, and the North Koreans suspected as their missiles fell out of the sky. But the gap is closing. Cyber weapons are so cheap to develop and so easy to hide that they've proven irresistible. And American officials are discovering that in a world in which almost everything is connected, phones, cars, electrical grids, and satellites, everything can be disrupted, if not destroyed. For several years, the thinking inside the Pentagon was that only nations with nuclear weapons could threaten America's existence. Now that assumption is in doubt. In almost every classified Pentagon scenario for how a future confrontation with Russia and China, or even Iran and North Korea might play out, the adversary's first strike against the United States would include a cyber barrage aimed at civilians. It would fry power grids, stop trains, silence cell phones, and overwhelm the internet. In the worst-case scenarios, food and water would begin to run out. Hospitals would turn people away. Separated from their electronics and thus their connections, Americans would panic and turn against one another. The Pentagon is now planning for this scenario because it knows many of its own war plans open with similarly paralyzing cyber attacks against our adversaries, reflecting new strategies to try to win wars before a shot is fired. Glimpses of what this would look like have leaked out in recent years, thanks partly to Edward J. Snowden, partly because of a mysterious group called the Shadow Brokers, suspected of close links to Russian intelligence, obtained terabytes of data containing many of the tools that the National Security Agency used to breach foreign computer networks. It didn't take long for some of those stolen cyber weapons to be shot back at America and its allies in attacks whose bizarre-sounding names, like WannaCry, suddenly appeared in the headlines every week. Yet the secrecy surrounding these programs obscures most public debate about the wisdom of using them or the risks inherent in losing control of them. The government's silence about America's new arsenal and its implications poses a sharp contrast to the first decades of the nuclear era. The horrific scenes of destruction at Hiroshima and Nagasaki not only seared the national psyche, but made America's destructive capabilities, and soon Russia's and China's, obvious and undeniable. Yet even while the government kept the details classified, how to build atomic weapons, where they are stored, and who has the authority to order their launch, America engaged in a decades-long political debate about when to threaten to use the bomb and whether to ban it. The book, The Perfect Weapon by David E. Sanger. Hey, I have a new book out. It's called The Hidden History of Neoliberalism, How Reaganism Gutted America and How to Restore Its Greatness. Greg Palast calls it a hand grenade of a book. You can pick it up wherever fine books are available. Tag you're it. Joe Biden has done a lot. He signed the Inflation Reduction Act into law. He announced targeted student debt relief plan. He issued 2 executive orders to safeguard access to reproductive health care. He signed the CHIPS and Science Act into law. He signed the PACT Act into law for our veterans. We have historically low unemployment rates, lower than we've had since the 1960s. He helped our economy recover through the American Rescue Plan. He confirmed our first black justice to the Supreme Court, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson. He expanded the NATO alliance. He rallied our allies in support of Ukraine. He's made once-in-a-generation infrastructure investments. We have record enrollment in the Affordable Care Act. More Americans have health care now than ever before, over the objections of the Republicans, I might add. Historic funding for HBCUs, the historically black college and universities. He reauthorized the Violence Against Women Act. I mean, just step by step, there has been so much that has been accomplished. In the face of all this Republican obstruction, there's a video with the complete list over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. Welcome back. Picking up your reports on what's going on in your states and how the day went and what you think is causing the various trends that you're observing. I was just reading a fascinating piece over on Daily Kos about the Stacey Abrams race, that there was this meme floating around Georgia that black men were not voting for Stacey Abrams, perhaps in part because of Herschel Walker trash-talking her. And it turns out that not so much. That was not what's going on. It was white people not voting for her that really swung that, which is frankly tragic. I mean, it's just so unfortunate that race is still such a huge issue in our politics. So, picking up your phone calls here, Jimmy in Madison, Wisconsin. Hey, Jimmy, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. It's funny you mentioned that. I think a little bit of that happened here in Wisconsin.
I think a lot of that happened there in Wisconsin with Ron Johnson running against Mandela Barnes, who's a black man.
Yeah. And so Governor Evers, remained, in one of his race.
Right, the
over
white guy.
Tim Michaels. And then Mandela Barnes just, barely lost. And I think a lot of what you just said hit the nail on the head here.
Yeah.
I think Barnes missed out on some messaging tying Johnson to Trump as much as he is. And I guess I have a question for you, and then I'll just hang up. I kind of have a theory or I'm kind of curious, is if Trump goes scorched earth, which I feel like he may, how that'll affect, future races, I guess.
Yeah.
And
I think if he tries to tear down the Republican Party, and in particular those parts of the Republican Party that he feels have deserted him. I mean, at the top of that list right now is Mitch McConnell. In fact, there were media reports that Trump reached out to Mitch McConnell 2 or 3 days ago and said, if I get reelected in 2024, you're going to be toast. Not that Mitch McConnell cares, frankly. I think what Donald Trump says. But my take on it, Jimmy, is that if Trump decides to try to burn down the GOP, you're not just going to see the Republican Party turn their back on him. You're going to see most of the media turn their back on him, particularly the conservative media. That's already happening. I mean, it's happening in Murdoch world in a big way right now. The Wall Street Journal, the New York Post, and Fox News all applauding Ron DeSantis and treating him like he's the second coming, the new incarnation of Jesus or something. And
so wait, oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to ask, what do you think, a guy like Ron Johnson will do then? Do you think he'll just, flip, and just?
Well, he's not publicly embracing Trump anyway. I mean, he's been going along with the line, but I think that what you see right across the board is that Republicans will just stop. The Trump humpers will stop humping Trump. And they'll go with DeSantis. That he's going to be their new love, and I'm seeing that trend already, and they're debating it on television right now. All the pundits, is Trump washed up or not? I've been saying for 6 months Trump is washed up. He's damaged goods. He has never been a competent person. He got into the White House purely largely because of help from Vladimir Putin, who saw Trump as his key to setting up Ukraine, and and that was his principal interest. And now he's being burned by that. So I don't think Putin is going to try to ride to Trump's defense again. I mean, he may defend DeSantis. We'll have to wait and see. But I think Trump is toast. I really do. And I realize, you know, a lot of people have said that a lot of times, and Trump kind of comes back like something out of a Freddy movie. But I really think he's toast. Jimmy, got to move along. And thank you for the call. It's great to hear from you. Bill in Tucson, Arizona. Hey, Bill, what's up?
Hey, how you doing?
Good.
You know, it's a little confusing, I think. The Secretary of State's office shows that the only county where precincts haven't been fully counted is Pima County, which is Tucson. And if you look at the races, you know, Hobbs is ahead. She got about 61% of the vote in Pima County.
Right, this is the Democrat running for governor, Katie Hobbs. I assume that, you know, the subtext of what you're saying is that Tucson is a heavily Democratic area.
Yes, and you know, but if you look at the Arizona Central website, it says that there's about a third of the votes still to be counted in Pima County and in Maricopa County. But in Maricopa County, Hobbs was getting the majority of the vote also.
Right, which is Phoenix.
And so Phoenix, right. So Phoenix, Tucson, and the northern part of the state, which is Flagstaff. So the three largest cities.
Right. Flagstaff is pretty Republican, though, isn't it? It's been a long time since I've been there.
It is.
That's my recollection.
But
it's a very wealthy suburb.
Right. If I look at the map, it's pretty much going toward Hobbs, and it's you know,
fascinating.
Kelly is ahead by about 89,000 votes, and again, it says that there's still about a third of the vote to be counted. But the Secretary of State's office says all the precincts have reported, and I don't quite understand the difference between the two. But
yeah.
What's disappointing, as somebody was mentioning it earlier, is in Pima County. It was about 37% of the eligible voters voted, and that's really disappointing because we have you know, a redistricted congressional seat where Kirkpatrick is retiring, so it's an open seat, and it's very, very close. It's within 5,000 votes, and the Republican, a guy named Juan Ciscomani, who worked for the current governor Ducey, and did what Blake Masters did, you know, changed his website to say, I'm not all these horrible things that you think I am.
Right.
And so, but Kirsten Engel, who's a lawyer, has been in the legislature for years, she's behind by about 2,700 votes. So it's and if I just look at what the Secretary of State says, there's about 12,000 votes to be counted, and Engel got about 61% of the vote. So it looks positive for her, but not if there's still a third of the vote to be counted. So I'm not quite sure where we're at.
Right. So all bets are off at the moment.
Yeah, maybe, but it looks good, I think, generally for Hobbs and for Kelly, because people in Maricopa County are favoring the Democrats, not the fascists.
Cool. NBC News just made it official. There will be a runoff in Georgia. I believe December 6th, my recollection is the date that they will hold that election. So that's just basically a month from now.
I'm glad I don't live in Georgia, because I can't imagine those commercials for the next 3 weeks.
Oh, yeah. It's going to be nuts. It's going to be nuts.
All right.
Bill, thanks for the call. Great to hear from you. You too. Tony in St. Petersburg, Florida. Hey, Tony, what's going on in Florida?
Well, as usual, Ron DeSantis is the subject is, if you ran it right on, I want to tell you what he did in this district around St. Petersburg. Charlie Crist, who was defeated by, I think it was like 1.5 million votes.
I'm listening.
Yeah, gave up his seat.
Yeah. So why do you think that Charlie Crist was beaten so badly in Florida?
Because Governor DeSantis redrew the districts. He very cleverly redrew them.
Yeah.
So he put in the Tampa Bay area. So we put we now have 3 GOP.
Although that's yeah, no, I get that. That's you know, cranking up the Republican representation in Congress, but that's not going to affect a statewide race. My take on it, Tony, is that DeSantis's election police parading 15 black people in front of the cameras in shackles for having voted And, you know, combined with this 47-page law that had all these complex things that you had to do or not do, and if you didn't do them or did do them the right way or the wrong way, you could end up in prison just for voting, just for registering to vote, just for helping somebody vote. I don't have the numbers yet. I'm waiting for them. But I do, you know, I am looking forward to seeing those numbers, but I do think that the black vote in Florida probably collapsed this time around. Tony, thanks a lot for the call. 45 minutes past the hour. We'll pick up more of your phone calls here on the other side of the break. Stay with us. It is your media support group for We the People, the Thom Hartmann Program.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archive.
Right back with more of your calls. Stick around. And welcome back. Patrick in Chicago. Hey, Patrick, thanks for listening on the Thom Hartmann app. What's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, how's it going? I just wanted to let you give a little report of Chicago, and we'll let you and your listeners know that you guys should all check out J.B. Pritzker's victory speech from last night. It was, in my opinion, extremely presidential. He came after the GOP. He came after he basically gave all the information that he gave that he did for Illinois, which is a lot. He legalized cannabis here. I mean, he's been great. I didn't vote for him initially when we had our primary, but I voted for him in the general, and I've been happy with what I've got. And I was happy to vote for him again. And if he runs for president, he's probably going to have my vote then too.
Interesting. Now, J.B. Pritzker is the billionaire heir to the Hilton fortune, isn't he? Am I remembering right?
I believe it's the Marriott. I'm not sure if it's Hilton. I don't think it's the Hilton, but yeah, it's some hotel
whatever
chain.
It is, some hotel chain. Yeah, the Marriott. Those go deeply into. I mean, that's a Mormon family. They always used to have the Book of Mormon in every Marriott hotel. But I don't know. And in any case, you know, it's nice to see a guy who you know, got into office, you know, in a blue state and has not just been a ne'er-do-well, has actually done a really, really good job, and has, you know, you know, I have heard a lot of really good stuff about J.B. Pritzker in Illinois. Thank you for that, Patrick.
The best thing about him, well, real quick, the best thing about him, he's got money, so we got to get him on our side.
Yeah, nothing wrong with that. No, you know, it's
for sure.
Yeah, Patrick, thanks a lot for the call. Richard in Bellevue, Washington. Hey, Richard, thanks for listening to KBCS. What's up?
Tom, first of all, I'm sure happy on this Wednesday. I was actually for many weeks, months, and even years fearing the way I was going to feel this morning, and I am glad to be pleasantly surprised and at least half wrong about the juggernaut.
Yeah, sadly, it's only half wrong. I mean, we're almost certainly going to lose the House, and we'll probably lose the Senate. We'll see, but anyway.
That's true, and I wanted to go ahead and point out one thing that they did wrong, and then pose a question to you that's already been referred to. The Democrats still, across at least what I saw on the national, still ran a lousy and lazy campaign by focusing only on abortion and then at the voting rights, which are definitely the two most important issues. But they left out all of the accomplishments that you point out in your list. And James Clyburn on NPR radio last night did the same thing in 2 minutes. All that stuff that's happened affects the people. And what the Democrats need to be doing is to be hammering on each and every one of those points every day of the next 2 years, in addition to the Republican. Anyway.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. The Democrats had so much raw material to use, and they chose to leave most of it behind. And the Biden administration has had some really substantial accomplishments, and they have not been bragging about those the way that you have to in this political environment. They really need to take a lesson from Trump. I mean, literally every day he would go out there and say, the economy's never been better. It's the best economy in history. Literally every day, even when the stock market had dropped to 5,000 points, Trump is out there going, hey, it's great. Hey, take a lesson, guys. Richard, thank you. We'll be right back. It's 49 minutes past the hour. Hey, I have a new book out. It's called The Hidden History of Neoliberalism, How Reaganism Gutted America and How to Restore Its Greatness. Greg Palast calls it a hand grenade of a book. You can pick it up wherever fine books are available. Tag, you're it. So did you hear the story about the three white guys, 20, 22, 24 years old, who just pleaded guilty to trying to attack power grids in 3 different parts of the United States? According to the Justice Department, their scheme was that they were going to bring down electricity for 3 basically major cities or major regions of the United States. And the theory of this program is sort of like what Tim McVeigh was all about back in 1990, I think it was 3, when he blew up the federal building. Their scheme was that doing so, cutting off the power to these cities. Well, this is from the Department of Justice. Quote, the defendants believed their plan would cost the government millions of dollars and cause unrest for Americans in the region. They had conversations about how the possibility of the power being out for months would cause a race war and induce the next Great Depression. They had suicide pills and everything. Why aren't we talking about white terrorism in America? There's a video about this over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. 51 minutes past the hour, picking up your calls, your thoughts, your observations, your predictions about what's going on in the place where you live. Jamie in Kissimmee, Florida. Hey, Jamie, what's going on in Florida? Jamie? Okay, I'm not hearing Jamie. Jamie's been on hold for a while and might be his first call or her first call. So Jamie is on line 6. Susie in Vaughan, Washington. Hey, Susie, what's on your mind today?
Oh, thank you. First of all, I'm not discouraged. Even though we might lose the 2 biggies, I feel like ultra inspired for the next 2 years, and I hope a lot of people do. And I just also had to add real quick that I love the fact that number 45 threw his wife under the bus. I mean, if that doesn't say something.
Isn't that classic? I mean,
Thank you for that.
That is like Donald Trump. I mean, that's just classic Trump. Oh yeah, Melania made me do it.
It made me so happy. I just felt giddy. So anyhow, do be encouraged, people. I got a little late in the game, my start, but I'm inspired to continue on and get just mouthier and uglier. I work for a huge corporation that I do not like or respect. But unfortunately, it's a job, and I work with nothing but rubes. And these people, I know they're licking their wounds because we didn't get Smiley. Yay, and I didn't want anybody in my state named Smiley to represent me. Patty Murray came through for us. Yay.
Yeah, she did.
Yeah.
She really did,
Yeah,
and she's a good candidate.
I was sweating bullets going to bed last night. But anyhow, thank you, and folks, be inspired. These next 2 years, we can do this.
There you go. Susie, thank you.
Yeah, and get ugly and be honest.
Yeah, there you go. Thanks for the report from Washington. Tony in Long Island. Hey, Tony, what's up?
Hey, Tom, how are you, sir?
I am well. What's on your mind?
Oh, well, hey, listen, thank God that Governor Kathy Hochul, she was reelected last night.
Yeah.
However, Congressman Lee Zeldin, who was a Trump acolyte, refuses to concede still.
Of course he does. I don't think it's going to work out all that well for him, though. My sense of it is that there was some mystery around elections, after Trump started saying, no, we didn't lose, it was stolen, and there was all these stories and all this stuff, and people were thinking, wow, could it be? But, the process was so transparent yesterday. You had reports from all over the country, the local reports. Right. You had all these Republican poll watchers. I mean, literally tens of thousands of Republican poll watchers hysterically checking everything. And, the right wing is not even complaining about election fraud anymore. They're just like, okay, we lost.
Oh, absolutely. But I guess the thing is he was thinking that, wait a minute, I got all of Suffolk and Nassau County, so that should have pushed me over the edge. Right. And I'm like, but wait a minute. if you don't have the metropolitan area, which is approximately 9 million people, which is pretty much the bulk of New York State,
right.
If you're not over 30% in New York City, you're not going to win.
Yeah.
I don't care how much you get upstate.
Yeah.
And the fact of the matter is he didn't get that. All he got was Staten Island.
Yeah.
Which
is
they
reliably
flip
Republican.
a lot. They flipped a lot of seats red, though, here, including pushing out
well,
the
that was because the
DCCC
redistricting
chairman.
in New York State was done by, your Supreme Court rather than by the legislature, is it not?
Correct, it was.
And you've got a bunch of Republicans on that Supreme Court. I mean, that, or at least curmudgeons. I don't know the deal. Yeah.
That's a nice way of putting it, yeah.
There you go.
But, at least the one thing is that, thank God, nobody wanted, because he was one of the 140 Republicans who voted against certification of the election. He had 2 fundraisers in New York City by Steve Bannon. So, he had a lot of things against him, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And there was no way he was going to remake himself into tough on crime. Like, wait a minute. When did you ever take a subway?
Yeah, Lee Zeldin. Yeah, he was a very, very rich guy too, right?
Yeah, he's worth over $2 million, and he only lives a few blocks away from me. I'm not even worth that.
Some kind of trust fund kid. Amazing, Tony. I got to move along, but thank you for the call and thanks for the report from New York City. Ernest, also in Manhattan. Hey, Ernest, what's on your mind? Or it says New York, New York. I don't know if that's Manhattan or which borough you're in.
Oh, I'm in Queens, Tom.
Okay, so what's up, Ernest?
Yeah, I'm hearing so much about how there's bad messaging and people are not paying attention and all that kind of stuff. The main thing that's going on right now is the voter suppression.
I agree.
i.e. Florida, they practically wiped out the vote for African Americans.
Yep.
And then this other stuff that they're doing, last-minute changes to election law, where all of a sudden now they're nitpicking a signature with no date.
Yep. That was Pennsylvania. You've got Georgia. The major voter suppression states right now are Georgia, Texas, and Florida. But Greg Pallas told us yesterday that a dozen states now have adopted Georgia's law that says that anybody can challenge the votes of tens of thousands of black people if they choose to. Any old white guy can just walk in and say, here, 10,000 black people, take them off the voting rolls.
Right, that's true. I heard that the very same thing on your show where I heard Pal's talking to you.
Yeah.
And it's spot on. That's the thing that's doing it. They changed the laws at the last minute.
Yep.
Then and then the final end. Okay, Arizona, you got guys standing out there acting like goons, but they're really not worried about that too much.
Yeah. No, I don't think that the so-called ballot watchers. I don't think that they were a variable in this election. I was concerned that they would be, but I don't think they are. Ernest, thanks for the call. Spot on. We'll continue our conversation on the other side of this break. Stay with us. Taking back the mainstream media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1 hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3 hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
Today's book in our book club is The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, by this guy, Thom Hartmann. This is from chapter 1, or from the introduction, actually. In 2016, 6% of Americans who were eligible to vote nominated Donald Trump as the GOP's presidential candidate. It was 8% for Hillary Clinton on the Democratic side. Trump went on to be elected president by 26% of eligible voters. The modern American oligarchs have largely stayed in power using 3 simple elements: explicit and overt racism, massive disinformation campaigns, and voter suppression. No ideas, no push for better schools, hospitals, airports, roads, or bridges, or reform of our health, energy, or financial systems. No promise of more and better jobs. None of these staples of past presidential campaigns can be found in pretty much any Republican advertising today. Instead, the public Republican message is all about race, or the subset of race, religion. Muslim stands in for brown Arab in GOP speak, and immigration, a.k.a. brown people from south of our border, and socialism. Meanwhile, Republican secretaries of state across the nation are vigorously purging voters from the rolls. Over 17 million, more than 10% of America's active voters, in just the 2016-2018 period, according to NBC News. After the 5 Republican appointees on the U.S. Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act in 2013, 14 GOP-controlled states moved within a year, some within days, to restrict access to the vote, particularly for communities of color, students, and retired people. In North Carolina, for example, 158 polling places were permanently closed in the 40 counties with the most African-American voters just before the 2016 election, leading to a 16% decline in African-American early voting in that state. An MIT study found that nationwide, Hispanic voters wait 150% longer in line than white voters, and black voters can expect to wait 200% longer in line to vote. In Indiana, then Governor Mike Pence's new rigorous voter ID law caused an 11.5% drop in African-American voting. Students are suing for their right to vote, and retired people who no longer drive but care passionately about their Social Security and Medicare are being turned away at the polls by the hundreds of thousands because their driver's licenses have expired. The obvious failure of 40-plus years of Reaganomics and GOP policies to maintain a functional middle class in America has been a problem for the modern GOP. In 1974, for example, the GOP had outright control of only 7 states. The message, elect us and we'll help the rich people, just didn't generally resonate with American voters. It's the reason why, outside of the fluke elections of 46 and 52, Democrats controlled the House of Representatives outright for 3 generations, from 1933 to 1996, and controlled the Senate for most of that time. Desperate to win the presidency for the GOP in 1968, Richard Nixon went so far as to commit treason by torpedoing a peace deal with President Lyndon Johnson that President Lyndon Johnson had worked out with the North and South Vietnamese. According to Abul Hassan Bani Sadr, then president of Iran, Ronald Reagan did the same thing by cutting a deal with Iran whereby they would hold on to the U.S. embassy hostages until after the 1980 presidential election, torpedoing Jimmy Carter's chances of re-election. But in 2000, the GOP changed tactics. After Reagan was almost busted for his part in Iran-Contra, he testified that he had forgotten about details of the program more than 80 times. His growing Alzheimer's spared him an indictment. They realized that getting busted for treason wasn't worth the risk. They needed a plan B, and it was deliciously simple. If most voters don't like what you're selling, then just don't let them vote. Paul Wayward promoted this idea back in 1980 when he was campaigning for Reagan after co-founding the Heritage Foundation. And indeed, many Republican luminaries, such as William Rehnquist, who went from serving the GOP by standing in polling places and intimidating Hispanic and Native American voters in the 1960s to becoming Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, rose up through the ranks by participating in Republican-run voter intimidation schemes. Voter suppression became the foundational go-to tactic for the GOP in 2000. Although the GOP attacked Democratic presidential nominee Al Gore with smear and innuendo, ridiculing him for helping write the legislation that created the modern internet, for example, the main thing that got George W. Bush into the White House was voter suppression. His brother, Florida Governor Jeb Bush, and Bush's Secretary of State, Katherine Harris, threw somewhere between 20,000 and 90,000 African-American voters off the rolls. They were able to get the vote close enough. The 5 Republican appointees to the Supreme Court functionally awarded Bush the presidency. The BBC covered this in 2001 in 2 major investigative reports that were seen all over the world, except on any American media. By 2016, the Republican Party had fine-tuned its voter suppression and intimidation systems to the point that they ran like well-oiled machines in nearly 30 states. Between the 2012 and 2016 presidential elections, for example, Ohio had purged more than 2 million voters from its rolls, the vast majority, more than 2 to 1, in heavily African-American and Hispanic counties. The 5 Republican appointees on the Supreme Court ruled in 2017 that they could keep it up. And other states have since adopted their new tactic of caging voters. The book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, by me.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Boy, Sean Patrick Maloney is really taking the abuse on Twitter. Sean Patrick Maloney losing to a rando after screwing crap up. I'm cleaning up the language here. For one decent and one amazing progressive in the party. Sean Patrick Maloney, of course, is the Democrat from New York State who was a member of the House of Representatives, who was the chair of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. He's the guy who was responsible for raising money and planning strategy and executing strategy to elect Democrats to the House of Representatives, and he just lost his own race. That says something. I'm not sure exactly what, but that says there is a message embedded in that. The district is one that Joe Biden carried by 10 points, if the news report I'm reading is accurate. So, you know, what was up with this? I don't know. Was it hubris? Was it mistakes? Just don't know. Maybe somebody from New York State can call and tell me. Valerie in Hampshire, Illinois. We're talking about, by the way, if you just tuned in, we're talking about what's going on in your state with the election. And Valerie, what's on your mind? What happened in Illinois?
Yeah, we did really well in Illinois. My biggest concern, and I think it was of fellow Illinoisans, was our Supreme Court was kind of being threatened, and the women, last I looked, have won their seats on the Supreme Court, so it's not going to be red.
That's good.
And also, we had a collective bargaining that we were either agreeing to or not, and that passed, and that was huge. Mm-hmm. The J.B. Pritzker, who's done great things for our state, he won, and he hopes, or we hope, he does more great things. So, you know, our Secretary of State is blue, Comptroller, Attorney General. So we're pretty happy in Illinois.
That's great. Illinois is becoming more and more of a blue state. It's and I think in large part because when the Democrats control Illinois, they do a really good job of running the state.
Yeah, they do. They do. We were in big financial problems, and JB's done wonderful at getting us out in the red or in the blue, and so to speak. You know, we have a better credit rating. He's just done a great job. So
I'm glad
Tammy Duckworth, Bill Foster, they're all keeping their seats. So we're happy.
Good. Well, Valerie, thank you for the report from Chicago. I appreciate, or from Hampshire, Illinois. Excuse me. Bonnie in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Hey, Bonnie, what's happening in Florida? What are your observations?
Well, you know, this is the first congressional election that I've been out of Palm Beach County. This is my first Miami race. Mm-hmm. And living in Broward, though, I have never seen so many commercials that have demonized everything Democratic and brought up nothing but socialism.
Right.
You know, And this is it. Socialism never worked, and never will.
And this is presumably because you've got a large Cuban population that is looking at the Castro regime, or what was the Castro regime.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And Venezuelans as well,
reading,
who are pissed off with Maduro.
Right. And so I'm looking at the Miami Herald and just finding some wonderful articles, opinion pieces by Fabiola Santiago, and a report of an FIU poll of 1,000 Cuban Americans done October 25th by Nora Gomez Torres. And one thing before I get off, I watched a little bit of Amy Goodman last night, a half hour, and heard Ralph Nader's take apart. And I think it would be great to invite him.
Okay. What was the point that he made that you thought was so important?
First, of the lack of support in Florida and the lack of a message, and what to do in the 2 months. The interregnum, I always forget that word. The 2 months that we have is interregnum. Yes, what we should be doing, which is part of what we should have been saying all along.
You're talking about the period between the election and people being sworn in on January, whatever it is?
Right, because we still have the majority. Mm-hmm. There are still a lot of things that can be done and finished. And
you're talking in the House and Senate right now. Yeah, I'm totally with you. There is so much that can and should be done, particularly if we're going to surrender the House. And maybe Chuck Schumer can figure out a way to get Manchin and Sinema to go along with at least drilling some holes in the filibuster. I mean, voting rights. Passing H.R. 1 and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. I don't know if those can be brought back up again. I'm guessing Schumer voted no on them so that he could bring them to the floor again, and they could be, reconsidered.
Could be.
But I don't know, frankly. I'm just not that close to what's going on in the Senate.
One more thing about the Cubans is they don't like DeSantis.
Well, why are they voting for him then?
Because they're voting for a Republican rather than a demonized Democrat.
Right.
They prefer Trump.
Right. And not just a demonized Democrat, a black demonized Democrat.
Yeah.
I mean, we just can't ignore the racism that is just cooked into American elections. It's just... Okay, Bonnie, thank you. Thanks for the report. I appreciate it. Jim in Chicago. Hey, Jim, your thoughts?
Hey, Tom, I just wanted to give you a heads up. Yesterday, I went to vote in person in Chicago, and they changed the system in which we vote, or the way we vote. So it had always been you connect the dots, or you connect the lines, make the arrow one with a felt tip Sharpie. Mm-hmm. They changed it this year to a really fat Sharpie, and it bled through the ballot to the other side.
Is there printing on the other side?
There is.
Huh.
That's
interesting.
More of the ballot.
Well, that's kind of the bad news. The good news is that the scanners only look at a little quarter-inch circle where the dot is, right? They only look at that space. So if there's crap going on around the ballot, it's probably not going to screw up the scanners. I'm assuming that after you filled out your ballot, it went through the scanner all right?
It did not. It rejected it.
Oh, really? Oh, interesting.
Yeah, because it looked like I had voted for multiple people.
Right.
Because it would go on the backside.
Were you able to make it good?
No, I wasn't. I called the Chicago Board of Elections, and my ballot was not counted.
Wow.
It shows that I had voted, or that I had been given a ballot, but that the ballot wasn't actually counted. Wow. So luckily, in Illinois, the election went the way that I would have voted, or I did vote. Right. So it doesn't really matter. But all this stuff is not.
Somebody bought the right kind of Sharpies, or the wrong kind of Sharpies, or whatever. I mean,
or the wrong kind of paper, something. Yeah. I don't know, but it's not just red states. There's something going on, and Yeah, that was the first time I've ever.
I doubt this was malicious. I'm guessing this was a screw-up.
I hope it wasn't. But I was just really disheartened by the fact that my vote was not counted.
Was it? Were you voting in a precinct that is generally controlled by Republicans?
No, very Democratic.
Yeah, interesting. Jim, thanks for the call.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
14 minutes, well, almost 15 minutes past the hour, picking up your phone calls, your stories of what's happening in your state as we are processing the outcome of this election. We'll be right back. And welcome back. David in Sarasota, Florida. Hey, David. Thanks for listening to the Thom Hartmann app. What's up?
Hi, Tom. I was wondering if you knew if there was any losses in the Progressive Caucus in the different states.
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to it. I'm sorry.
Okay. And also, the Bernie had endorsed a woman from Texas that was going to bring up a bill to overturn Citizens United. I believe she was from Texas, but I don't know her name. Maybe some caller from Texas can help us out.
Perhaps, yeah. I'm not sure who you're talking about. I know Bernie has endorsed a lot of candidates, so.
Right. That would have been my other question, if any of his candidates won.
Yeah.
And yeah. I noticed today, I went to the USA Today used to have a big section of who won the votes and everything. Now you got to go to the computer to look it up.
Oh, really? Right. Interesting.
Yeah. And my last point, I really disappointed in my fellow Floridans. They always voted, not always, but recently they're always voting against their own best interests.
Yeah, that happens a lot.
Yeah.
That happens a lot.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Especially white people voting against their best interest when there's a black candidate on the ballot, a black Democrat. We've got to figure out how to deal with this. This is just, I am seeing in both the results in Wisconsin and the results in Georgia, when you compare the Senate race with the gubernatorial race, I think that what we're seeing is just plain old naked white racism. White people unwilling to vote for a Democrat even when they're on their side, and that is wrong, and the Democratic Party has to figure out how to deal with this. David, thank you for the call. Robert in Fort Dodge, Iowa. Hey, Robert, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, speaking of racism, I don't know if that's the case here, but DeGier got beat by, she's a black woman, she got beat by Reynolds by 18 points, just with the register.
Kim Reynolds, your governor?
Yeah, DeGier, yeah, she ran against Kim Reynolds, yeah, for governor. And then Mike Franken, who's a sharp guy, lost by 12 points, and a week ago he was only down by 2 or 3, and I can't figure out. At the last minute, he was almost down by 12 points, and he lost by 12 points to Grassley. And Grassley's a complete buffoon, and I just don't have much faith in Iowa. I don't know if this
I'm
is
guessing
ever
that
change.
there's probably $10-15 million bucks that got dropped into the major Iowa media markets on behalf of Grassley in the last 2 weeks.
It was unbelievable, and the nasty the ads that they ran against the Democrats, and they didn't respond. They just refused to respond. Kim Reynolds, she's horrible. I mean, I could go on for an hour of what she's.
I mean, it may well be that the Democrats just didn't have the money to respond. I mean, that's what we saw here in Oregon. You had, we've got the governor's race and Tina Kotek, who is running against a Republican. The airways are just saturated with ads for the Republican, who's got two billionaires behind her. And I haven't seen an ad for the Democrat in that race in a week.
Yeah. Anyway, what do you think outside of Iowa? What do you think the future for Tim Ryan is? And I'll let you go. Thanks.
That's a good question. I don't know. I don't know what he's going to do now because he's lost his House seat, and he lost the Senate, and it's just a tragedy. I think in Ohio and South Carolina, the Democratic Party didn't put any money into either of those races, Beasley and South Carolina, and they should have in both. Robert, I got to run, but thanks for the call. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. So how do you know which party has the most crooks in it? You know, the Republicans are always saying, oh, those Democrats are soft on crime and, a lot of murders in Democrat-run cities. Well, for the record, first off, red states and red counties have a higher per capita murder rates than do blue states and blue counties. This is just a fact. But secondly, let's look at some of the administrations. I mean, the Obama administration had no criminal indictments. The Jimmy Carter administration had 1. The Bill Clinton administration had 2. But what about the Republican administrations? It was 16 for George W. Bush. It was 26 criminal indictments for Ronald Reagan. Richard Nixon's administration had 76 criminal indictments. And of course, the full-time professional rapist and grifter, Donald Trump, he had 215 criminal indictments. So who's really soft on crime? We got a video about it over at ThomHartmann.com. You can check it out. "20 minutes past the hour, picking up your calls as we're processing what happened in the last 24 hours and thereabouts. Brad in Fife Lake, Michigan. Hey, Brad, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, I want to talk more to the activists out there that are listening. Here in Michigan in 2020, we had a proposal to take the redistricting away from the politicians and do it by, citizen council.
Right, a commission.
And and so it's been redistricted now, and at this particular time, in 38 years, the Democrats have taken control of both House and Senate and maintained control of the governorship, the district attorney, not just the attorney general, and the Secretary of State on down.
Yep, and it's a fine thing. And in fact, the Michigan House went Democratic for the first time in quite a number of years, didn't it, in this election?
Yeah. 38 years.
38 years. There you go. Wow.
So for all those activists out there, they need to start writing up, proposals to get on the ballot, for the next election.
Yeah.
And to get their, states unjurymandered.
There you go. Yeah, I agree with you, Brad. In Jacksonville, Florida. Hey, Shay, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Hello, everyone. First, I just want to say thank you for everything you've done to the run-up of, this election, and for helping to, push the agenda and the ideas that we need to focus in on. But I will tell you that I worked the polls yesterday from about 8:30 yesterday morning until 7 last night. And there were a lot of people in line, African Americans. I voted last Friday in early voting, same deal. And so though the horrible images of what DeSantis did in terms of arresting these people who thought they were eligible to vote may have had some effect in some communities, perhaps. Those people that who may have thought that they were eligible to vote and very well could have, they may not have turned out. But what I will tell you is that there was a heavy presence of African American voters.
I'm reassured.
Yes. My concern is, well, it's a couple, but one thing is that using that language will lend to the stereotype or the idea of the lie that they've been trying to perpetuate in regards to, stolen elections. The biggest problem that happened, and I've heard it with a couple of other people, and as well as the two candidates that I helped in their candidacies in communications and other consulting, is that the FDP has not done its job.
Florida Democratic Party.
Correct. Thank you. And they did not fund, endorse, or help. Governor Christ, former Governor Christ, which I wish I could say current, he actually called one of the candidates yesterday to wish him well. These candidates reached out from the state as well as the local parties to get endorsement, any type of funding. None of that happened. Yeah. And our good friend, and even the CCC-DC, I was wondering what they were doing. And to hear that this gentleman lost his seat over in New York does not surprise me.
Yeah.
I had an hours-long conversation with one of the candidates today. He called, and he's very frustrated. He's going to run for Senate in 2024. He's not deterred, but I told him to, yes, sir. And I told him to gather all of the Democratic candidates who lost, and for them to have a powwow and see what was done well and what wasn't done well, and then send up a report to the Florida Democratic Party, and let them know, they need to be on their jobs. There was no presence here, Tom. There was no funding. And I told Mr. Jones, Dr. Cornelius Jones, who ran, I said, it seems like the Democratic Party seeds races, CEDE, instead of SEED. Right. They have not put money into these races. Ohio, no money there, like you mentioned.
South Carolina.
No, and how is it that we can think that Ron DeSantis has won by the spread or the margin? There's something amiss, I'm telling you.
No, I got my report that black people were not showing up to vote in Florida from Joy Reid, who was down there. I mean, she was on MSNBC a couple of days ago in Florida and reporting on this. So, that's where I got that from.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people did not vote in the early voting. I think a lot of people waited until the last day. I could not believe how many people are in line, and I actually had taken a break, and I was coming through the line, and I just said to a young African-American young lady, well, she was coming from the parking lot to go to vote, and with her little son, and I said, early voting is the way to go. She was like, yeah. She was like, I see. I'm so sorry I didn't.
Yeah. Well, Shay, the other problem is that the Republican Party is floating in cash. I mean, they've got all these right-wing billionaires pouring money into them, and the Democratic Party is begging for pennies. And that probably has a lot to do with why you weren't getting that support down there. But Shay, thank you for the in-depth report from Florida. I really appreciate it. Thank you, and all the insights. Thank you so much.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll continue our conversation on the other side of this break. What's happening in your state, and what do you think it's going to mean for the next 2 years? In the Thom Hartmann Book Club today, our book is by Frantz Fanon, and it's The Wretched of the Earth. This is from the chapter on national culture on page 145. It sort of reads like Thomas Paine, actually. Each generation must discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it in relative opacity. In the underdeveloped countries, preceding generations have simultaneously resisted the insidious agenda of colonialism and paved the way for the emergence of the current struggles. Now that we are in the heat of combat, we must shed the habit of decrying the efforts of our forefathers or feigning incomprehension at their silence or passiveness. They fought as best they could with the weapons they possessed at the time, and if their struggle did not reverberate throughout the international arena, the reason should be attributed not so much to a lack of heroism, but to a fundamentally different international situation. More than one colonized subject had to say, "We've had enough." More than one tribe had to rebel. More than one peasant revolt had to be quelled. More than one demonstration had to be repressed for us to stand firm, certain of our victory. For those of us who are determined to break the back of colonialism, our historic mission is to authorize every revolt, every desperate act, and every attack aborted or drowned in blood. In this chapter, we'll analyze the fundamental issue of the legitimate claim to a nation. The political party that mobilizes the people, however, is little concerned with this issue of legitimacy. Political parties are concerned solely with daily reality. And it is in the name of this reality, in the name of this immediacy which influences the present and future of men and women, that they make their call to action. The political party may very well speak of the nation in emotional terms, but it is primarily interested in getting the people who are listening to understand that they must join in the struggle if they quite simply want to exist. We now know that in the first phase of the national struggle, colonialism attempts to diffuse nationalist demands by manipulating economic doctrine. At the first sign of a dispute, colonialism feigns comprehension by acknowledging with ostentatious humility that the territory is suffering from serious underdevelopment that requires major social and economic reforms. And it is true that certain spectacular measures, such as the opening of work sites for the unemployed here and there, delay the formation of a national consciousness by a few years. But sooner or later, colonialism realizes it is incapable of achieving a program of socioeconomic reforms that would satisfy the aspirations of the colonized masses. Even when it comes to filling their bellies, colonialism proves to be inherently powerless. The colonial state very quickly discovers that any attempt to disarm the national parties at a purely economic level would be tantamount to practicing in the colonies what it did not want to do in its own territory. And it is no coincidence that today the doctrine of Cartierism is on the rise just about everywhere. Cartier's bitter disillusionment with France's stubborn determination to retain ties with people it will have to feed, whereas so many French citizens are in dire straits, reflects colonialism's inability to transform itself into a nonpartisan aid program. Hence, once again, no need to waste time repeating, better to go hungry with dignity than to eat one's fill in slavery. On the contrary, we must persuade ourselves that colonialism is incapable of procuring for colonized people the material conditions likely to make them forget their quest for dignity. Once colonialism is understood where its social reform tactics would lead it, back come the old reflexes of adding police reinforcements, dispatching troops, and establishing a regime of terror better suited to its interests and its psychology. Within the political parties, or rather parallel to them, we find the cultured class of colonized intellectuals. The recognition of a national culture and its right to exist represent their favorite stomping ground. Whereas the politicians integrate their action in the present, the intellectuals place themselves in the context of history. Faced with the colonized intellectuals' debunking of the colonist theory of a pre-colonial barbarism, colonialism's response is mute. It is especially mute since the ideas put forward by the young colonized intelligentsia are widely accepted by metropolitan specialists. It is in fact now commonly recognized that for several decades, numerous European researchers have widely rehabilitated African, Mexican, and Peruvian civilizations. Some have been surprised by the passion invested by the colonized intellectuals in their defense of a national culture. But those who consider this passion exaggerated are strangely apt to forget that their psyches and their egos are conveniently safeguarded by the French or German culture whose worth has been proven and which has gone unchallenged. I concede the fact that the actual existence of an Aztec civilization has done little to change the diet of today's Mexican peasant. I concede that whatever proof there is of the once mighty Songhai civilization does not change the fact that the Songhais today are undernourished, illiterate. Reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening, it really means a lot to us. Welcome back. Oregon, the governor's race was just called in the last few minutes. Tina Kotek, the Democrat, has won. The big loser in this race is not the Republican who was running against her. It is Phil Knight, Oregon's wealthiest man, I believe, a billionaire who poured millions of dollars into the Republican race and just buried us in television ads, about how terrible Tina Kotek was and, our Democratic Speaker of the House and et cetera, et cetera. So good news. Good news, and it wasn't just Phil. There was another billionaire, Tim somebody or other, the guy Tim Boyle, who is Columbia Sportswear, I think it was. Yeah. So, or at least these are the this is what I'm reading. But again, it's a tough one. It's a real challenge in American politics now, since the Supreme Court has said that whoever has the most money has the greatest voice. We all get one vote, but whoever has the most money has the loudest voice. And that is not how politics should work. It's just wrong. Judy in Detroit, near Detroit, Michigan. Hey, Judy, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. How are you? Well, I'm going to piggyback on the other person from Michigan who called, and we're calling it a trifecta here in Michigan today because we're literally walking on sunshine. Cannot even believe that it actually happened, that we elected not only Governor Whitmer, reelected Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson, and our amazing attorney Dana Nessel, Attorney General, but we did take the House and the Senate in Michigan for the first time in almost 40 years. And I've been listening to your show for years. I would like to, one day, a woman named Katie Fahey posted on Facebook in 2017, hey, does anybody want to work with me to help try to un-gerrymander the state of Michigan? I said yes. Thousands of other people said yes. We worked for years to get 400,000 signatures to get on the ballot. Then it got on the ballot. And then, of course, you know, the Republicans fought it like crazy and sued and did everything they could to get it taken off the ballot. It passed with 70% approval. The redistricting commission process was a long, drawn-out, painful process with hours of testimony and people calling in, and fairer districts were drawn, and that's how the election happened yesterday and how we won. And we passed. We made women's reproductive rights will be amended into our Constitution now in Michigan as of yesterday. And we also passed a stricter voting, where more voting rights are made more protected. And we passed Prop 1 yesterday, which requires elected officials to disclose financial information about what they have investments in and what businesses. So we're a terrible state for requiring, for
billionaires to mess around in.
Yeah, exactly. Our transparency is terrible, but it'll be a little bit better now.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, we literally could. The only thing I wish would have happened yesterday was Kyra Harris Bolden was running for Supreme Court in Michigan, and we would have had our first black female Supreme Court member, and she was, defeated by a small margin by somebody else who's been on there for a while. But we held our Michigan Supreme Court, maintained its Democratic lean. I mean, it just could not have been a better day in Michigan yesterday.
Garland Gilchrist is somebody I used to know years ago. We worked together on the board. We were both on the board of a charity. And he's been on the show a couple times. It's been a while since I've talked with him. He's the lieutenant governor. I'm assuming he was running for re-election and he won also?
Yes, he did.
Garland is a good guy.
He's amazing.
He's a really decent human being. Such a good person.
My goodness. Yes. It was. We couldn't be happier in Michigan, and the fact that we actually can pass common sense gun laws now, and we can repeal the 1931 law that would outlaw abortion. And there's so many things we can do with the Democratic Senate and House now. It's just, I mean, the feeling is just amazing.
They're going to put the state back together, basically, after it's been essentially raped for 30 years by Republicans.
Yes. I mean, right to work for less. Let's get it gone.
Yeah.
The pension tax. Let's get rid of it. I mean, there's so many things we can do now. So.
I get it.
Very excited here.
Judy, thank you. Thanks for the report. Thanks for the upbeat report from Michigan. It's great to hear.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Bobby in Yonkers, New York. Hey, Bobby, what's on your mind today?
Hey, how you doing, Tom? I work in Yonkers, but I live in Sean Patrick Maloney's district.
Oh, my.
I voted for him, every time that he's come up. But this is this is a rough district. This was a Trump district. Mm-hmm. And he lost, in 2016 or 2020, because I think people just had enough.
He won in 2020. That's why he was on the ballot this time. But it was his district the victim of this. I understand there was some substantial redistricting in New York State that was done by basically conservatives on your Supreme Court because the legislature screwed it up somehow.
Absolutely. Well, basically, the legislature, which is Democratic, gerrymandered in favor of the Democrats.
Right.
So, all of a sudden, the conservatives got all up in arms. Oh, this isn't fair. Well, this is the problem: is the Democrats bring the broken butter knife to the gunfight once again, and they said, "Oh, you got us, okay," and they didn't fight it. And then on top of that, Sean Patrick Maloney, who's a heavyweight basically in Congress, he moved the district because his district, this district got changed. The one I'm in, the district moved, and he took away a seat from a young guy who got primaried, and his name escapes me now. But he was a good progressive. Sean Patrick Maloney, not much of a progressive.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, he's you're kind of generic corporate Democrat. But he was also in charge of getting Democrats elected all across the House of Representatives. So it's just so ironic that he went down in flames.
Yeah. Well, it's just he didn't fight and the Democrats, quite frankly, didn't fight enough to fix the gerrymander.
Right.
They didn't fight when we lost the seat by just a few people, really.
Right.
We lost a seat. When they did do the redistricting, when the court mandated it, they basically gave a seat to upstate. And, where I am, I'm 40 miles north of Manhattan. But driving around here sometimes, you'd think you're in Mississippi.
Yeah.
Seeing Trump flags flying around.
Yeah, I've spent a fair amount of time in northern New York, upstate New York, and you're absolutely right. And I used to live in New Hampshire and Vermont, which is just right next door. And I'm very familiar with the area. Well, Bobby, thank you. Thank you for the report from New York. That was fascinating. I appreciate the call. Michael in Yakima, Washington. Hey, Michael, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. Yeah, actually, I'm in Packwood, Washington, on the West Slope. Okay.
I will correct that.
Just wanted, long-time listener, first-time caller. Just want to report, according to the numbers I saw on TV this morning on the news, Marie Glusenkamp Perez defeated Joe Kent, who's a Trump Republican.
Oh, good.
In the 20th district. Yeah. So we kind of emotional, huh?
Yeah. Yeah, I remember people talking about how toxic Joe Kent was. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah. Yes. I live probably the most conservative county in Western Washington, certainly. And it was just a happy surprise.
That's great. That's great. Michael, thanks for the report. I appreciate the call.
Betcha.
Thank you. Mike in Columbia, Missouri. Hey, Mike, what's on your mind today?
Hello, Tom. You mentioned Joy Reid, and I just wanted to tell you she is a joy.
Yeah, Joy. I love Joy's show. She does a great job.
I know. I hope this question doesn't seem silly to you, but Beto O'Rourke, he's in El Paso. Kind of reminds me of Marty Robbins' song, El Paso. Do you think if he changed his appearance to look like a stereotyped redneck Texan, wear a Western hat, wear a gun, wear Western clothes, speak like a Texan, do you think that would have helped?
I doubt it. I don't think that the folks who, what you're describing is sometimes referred to as cultural conservatives. And I don't think that a Democrat can pretend to be a cultural conservative and, a cowboy essentially, unless they really are. There's a couple of Democrats out there who, John Fetterman, for example, he just oozes blue collar, working class guy. But you can't fake it. You can't fake it. Beto is who he is. He's kind of a gangly, geeky guy who really gets the populist message. But again, the Democrats were wiped out in Texas, by a tsunami of money coming in for the Republicans, and B, all the changes to the election laws making it much, much harder for Democrats to win. So I don't think that would work, Mike. Mike, thanks for the call. Albert in St. Louis, Missouri. Hey, Albert, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, Tom, I wanted to call. Can you hear me?
I can.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, okay. I wanted to call because every election season I come to the same conclusion. What is this ridiculous program we have for American citizens to vote? You got 50 states with different rules. You got, in Florida, you got 67 counties, and each one of the counties got different rules. So I'm saying, as an American citizen, if I have a right to vote, I should be able to vote any place in the continental United States, just like you take my money wherever I'm at, you can count my vote wherever I'm at, and you can record it properly since you know how to find my money.
Yeah. In Canada, they have an election commission. And I wrote an op-ed months ago suggesting that we should do something like that in America. I should probably revisit it because it really works. I mean, they've standardized their elections across Canada. You don't have regional differences. You don't have regional. I mean, you know, it's completely standardized. And so everybody knows what to expect. It's easy to vote. You have really, really high levels of participation. And this is the sort of thing that we should be doing in the United States. And I don't know if H.R. 1 had anything like that, but you know, the Constitution does allow for it, and Congress needs to get their act together. Albert, thank you. Spot on that. That's a good one. 46 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. Do you think Kevin McCarthy is going to survive this? I mean, you know, obviously he's going to stay in the House, but is he going to be the Speaker? I'm skeptical.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archive.
I think there's going to be a big battle between the Jim Jordan faction and the Kevin McCarthy faction. We'll see. We'll see what happens, but interesting times. And welcome back. Mary in Waterloo, Iowa. Hey, Mary, what's on your mind today?
Well, this is the way I look at Iowa's voting. At the beginning of the vote coming in, I believe it was all the small rural populations that came in early.
Very heavily Republican, presumably.
No, they were Democrats. Democrats
really?
were leading in Iowa. Huh. All of them. All of them were leading.
Wow.
And then as the night went on, it started gradually switching, and I think and at the very end, I think like Des Moines and Cedar Rapids and the big towns, then they're the ones that really piled on the Republicans.
Oh, that's interesting. Do you think that's because there was so much advertising in those media markets that the Republicans had a lot of money to advertise? I know Mitch McConnell poured money into.
Yes, the Republicans just poured the money in advertising.
Yeah.
But I'm with all the other people. The Democrats did not have a message.
Mm-hmm.
They should, like Mike Franken, he should have hit every no vote that Grassley voted against. Right. He didn't say hardly anything against that.
Right.
They didn't vote. They didn't say it like it was. They voted for tax breaks for the wealthy. They voted against insulin. They voted against, what was that, Build Back Better?
Yep.
All the Republicans voted against that. There was nothing said about anything about that. Preschool child or community.
They voted against veterans benefits. They voted against $28 million for baby formula. They voted against a bill that would have stopped oil and gas price gouging.
Yes, there was nothing said what the Republicans said no to.
Yeah. Amazing.
But no, I still think the big cities pulled the Republicans over the line.
Interesting. Very interesting. Mary, thanks for the report from Iowa. That's fascinating. Steve in Little Rock, Arkansas. Hey, Steve, what do you know?
Hey, Tom. Another dark day in Arkansas. The miasmic jungles of Arkansas, like Mencken said. You know, we had a really decent guy, smart young gentleman running for governor.
Against Kay Ivey, right?
Excuse me?
Against Kay Ivey. I think she was just declared the winner about an hour ago.
Arkansas.
Oh, Arkansas. I'm sorry, I'm mixing up my states. That was Mississippi or Alabama. Well, in any case, who are the...
Alabama. It would be Alabama.
Alabama, thank you. So,
we got Sarah Huckabee Sanders.
Oh, that's right. Oh, my God, yeah.
You know, the gentleman who was running against him, Chris Jones,
yeah,
he had a degree from MIT. He had a successful career in economic development,
right,
which we really need in Arkansas.
Yep. But he was a black guy running for governor in Arkansas. I mean, that's a challenge too, right?
Yeah. Sarah has a degree in lying from Trump University. And the ads she run were awful. You know, it was like Chris Jones is running against Karl Marx here.
Yeah.
But I do have a cause, I think. the whole politics of Arkansas has just kind of turned to crap ever since term limits.
Oh, interesting.
It's like the Republicans were laying in wait for that.
Yeah.
And they had a whole stable of unworthies waiting in the wings to take over.
Yeah.
And
term limits tend to swing the politics of any state toward the power of the lobbyists, of the institutional, the institutional infrastructure, essentially. That's amazing. Steve, thank you. I'm sorry, we're out of time, but I appreciate the call, Steve. Thank you. We'll be right back. It's 10 minutes before the hour. Hey, I have a new book out. It's called The Hidden History of Neoliberalism, How Reaganism Gutted America and How to Restore Its Greatness. Greg Palast calls it a hand grenade of a book. You can pick it up wherever fine books are available. Tag you're it. 9 minutes before the hour. Welcome back. Kathy in Lansing, Michigan. Hey, Kathy, how's my hometown?
Oh, it's doing pretty good. What makes me happy is same-day registration on top of everything else that's good that happened here. There was an interview with a student in a dorm last night at State, and she got in line at 7 o'clock at night, and she didn't get to vote until midnight. Now, the polls closed at 8, so there are probably people behind her, too.
Wow.
So there were a lot of the young people came out. They showed up.
Yeah, they really did. I mean, this would have been a red wave if it weren't for people under 30. And,
absolutely.
This has to be proclaimed from the rooftops. Kathy, thank you. Thanks for the information. Mary in Elk Grove Village, Illinois. Hey, Mary, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, I'm so excited I got through. I have a documentary that I just watched by happen chance 2 nights ago. It's called Slay the Dragon. And I'm following up on what a previous caller said. She said that they got rid of gerrymandering by the politicians. And this grassroots organization called Voters Not Politicians. After the 2016 election, a young woman, Katie Fahey.
Yeah, this is in Michigan.
Yeah, in Michigan.
Yeah.
And they got rid of it.
Yep.
And they were sued, and but they prevailed, and I really believe that's what happened in Michigan.
Oh, that's the key. If you can unrig the election systems, you're going to have a whole lot of red states that are going to go blue, or purple states that are going to go blue.
How can we use this in all the other states? How can we get
step by step?
Yeah. So I highly recommend you and any of your listeners to watch this documentary, Slay the Dragon.
Where is it available?
I believe I watched it on Amazon Prime.
Okay.
But I know you can get DVDs and things like that.
Sure.
Just Google Slay the Dragon, and I think we all need this.
Okay.
And it's not gonna work out for Democrats all the time.
No, I get
we do the same thing.
Yeah, I get it. But when you make it fair, I mean, California did the same thing. They have a commission that redrew the districts in California. And,
make it fair.
Yeah, suddenly
there's more of us.
Suddenly the politics of the state started making sense, and started actually working for the people who live there. Mary, thank you. Thank you for the call. It's great to hear from you. Jess in Cambridge, Minnesota. Hey, Jess, thanks for listening to KTNF.
Hey.
What's up?
Real quick, first, it's Jeff.
Jeff, I'm sorry.
But yeah, that's okay. I was just going to mention the Secretary of State race in Minnesota. So Steve Simon is the incumbent Democrat. We've always had really clean elections, and the opponent was one by the name of Kim Crockett, who was denying from the start that she would, ever take a loss. And last I checked, it was about 200,000 votes that Steve Simon was ahead. The Democrat was ahead. I want to urge Kim Crockett, the Republican, to do a recount. She can pay for a recount and try to retain those 200,000 votes, which of course will never happen, and it'll be a big waste of money. I just wish she would do that.
Okay. All right, Jeff, your voice is registered. Thank you. David in Hartford, Connecticut. Hey, David, what's up?
Hey, Tom, a big coast-to-coast hug from
from me to you and your crew
thank
out
you.
there.
Back at you. What's on your mind?
Thank you. I couldn't agree more with, I think it was Albert, who a few calls back, his main point was making voting easier, which is a huge thing we need to do. And I think we can do it. Connecticut took a step in that direction yesterday by passing our one ballot initiative, which was a yes to early voting. It passed 60-40.
Oh, that's great.
So, yeah, that was good. So that would be a great message as far as like one of our main messages as a party to move forward, because I think people basically have a sort of are receptive to fairness. It just needs to be pointed out, you know. Well, we got Richard Blumenthal on board again. That's good. We got Ned Lamont. That's good. And where I live in District 5, Johanna Hayes, she's awesome.
Yeah.
So we got some good results here. And real quick, I got to give a shout out to Sean Caston, District 6 in Illinois. The way that you gave a shout out to your old friend in Michigan, that's how I feel about Sean. We grew up together in New York, and he's just such a genuine good person and happens to be one of the handful of scientists that we sent to D.C. in 2018. So he's rocking and rolling. Yeah, so he's one to follow out there in suburban Chicago.
That's great. There's some good people in Congress for sure. David, thank you for that. Gary in Woodbridge, Virginia. Gary, I got 25 seconds. You got a quick one?
Yeah, Tom, I'll try to be quick. What the young lady said earlier, I agree with about the candidates getting together, touching base, comparing notes. But I think we should go with the winners, people who won their races. Get
learn our lessons from them. Yeah, what did you do that worked? That's a good one, Gary. That's an excellent one. Thank you for calling and making that point. Hey, thanks so much for being with us today. We'll continue with this conversation tomorrow. In the meantime, don't forget democracy is not a spectator sport. This ain't over, right? We got everything right now is leading up to 2024, to the presidential election. And that presidential election, that election in 2 years, is going to, I believe, decide whether America continues to be a democracy and, in fact, enhances democracy, or whether we turn into a fascist state. So get out there, get active, tag you're it. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We take